Okay. Hello, everyone joining us live. We are happy to announce and start our HackMotion webinar series for 2023. We're still just getting started, so we'll wait a couple of more minutes till some more people join us. But we're going to start shortly. So thank you all for joining. Just before we wait for those couple of minutes for the people to come, I'll run through some organizational housekeeping tasks to let you know kind of what's the structure of the event, what are we going to be doing. So we're going to have this webinars going for 3 days, starting Monday, ending Wednesday. We'll have a lot of great coaches join us throughout 3 days, and we're going to share some educational, entertaining, and inspiring stories around golf and golf swing coaching. So hopefully you'll get a lot out of this as golf coaches and players yourselves. So plan for the 3 days is we're going to have kind of a combination of both presentations and individual discussions with coaches. We're going to complement that by sharing some of our learnings that we have learned throughout last 5 years of working in the golf industry. Plus, also, we're going to share some new features around HackMotion, about the app that we have developed that works with the product, and share you some insights that you can find when you are training with your HackMotion yourself. What's the plan for today? Today, we have 3 great coaches. Unfortunately, there's been one little lineup change that happened over the weekend. We had James Ridyard joining today. Conversation with him is going to be moving for tomorrow, so that's still on the books. But if there's going to be any other adjustments or changes to the schedule, just please follow us on hackmotion.com, where we will have the latest lineup available at all times. But more specifically for today, first of all, we have Alan Terrell joining. Afterwards, we're going to have Haney talking a little bit about his coaching and his experience. That's going to be followed by my team member Reinholtz sharing some the insights and the knowledge that we've gained over the last couple of years. And we're going to follow up that with Jason Birnbaum, where we're going to cover the topic around the grip in the golf swing. And we're going to wrap up the day with Mark, my other team member, Marcus, giving us a little bit more insight about HackMotion and what are the new latest features in the product. So should be pretty fun and exciting. So I think without further ado, let's kick off and join and have our first guest join us. I think he's already here. Let me introduce him first before we start our conversation. He was awarded Golf Magazine's 2021-22 Top 100 Coach in America. In 2020, he was the Carolinas PGA Teacher of the Year. Over his career, he has worked with multiple PGA and top college level golf players. One of his most kind of well-known students is Dustin Johnson, probably recognized as one of the best, if not the best golfer on the planet today. We have Alan Terrell joining us. Alan, how's it going?
Morning. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's doing great. And obviously, what better way to kick it off with you? So thanks for joining us. Maybe before we kind of kick off our first presentation and conversation, we'll just briefly kind of explain what's going to be the structure in our conversation with you. So with you, we're going to more specifically look around and discuss Dustin Johnson's swing pattern, because he is somewhat of a unique example with respect to that. We're going to discuss a bit in terms of what other things happen in the golf swing to actually allow that kind of wrist pattern, what it was been the process of developing that, what are maybe some prerequisites of actually even having that sort of a wrist pattern, and then obviously just touch upon briefly a couple of other questions around golf teaching, how do amateur players should work on their swing and their wrist pattern. So it should be quite a bit of fun. So yeah, I think if that's okay, then I will allow you, give the floor to you, Alan, to share the screen, and then we can kick it off.
Okay, great. Well, first off, with Dustin, there wasn't an intent to develop, obviously, his wrist patterns. That's something that for different reasons growing up, he developed some of that flexion in his lead wrist throughout his backswing, and then it actually increased more when he got out on the PGA Tour. So it's pretty cool to see kind of that involvement. He, as we all know, strong grips, trying to play draws aren't probably the best idea if you want to make money. There's a way of doing it, but it's a challenge from a consistency perspective. So he was probably a lot less bowed when he was younger pro and still played a draw. And then over time, as his lead arm, he started having a more vertical lead arm in his career. And then we'll talk about, I got some 2D stuff. I know this is a 3D world, but I'm going to kind of go through it with 2D. I've got, I'm going to just kind of put Rory and his swings up. But what I think is important for people to understand is their grip and how that relates to what their wrist does. There's one thing, having a strong grip and moving your lead wrist in flexion versus having a neutral grip and moving into flexion. That's a different animal in itself. Dustin does not have his grip changes quite a bit year to year, but he actually doesn't have that strong of a lead hand grip. When our golfers come to us and they have a lot of flexion and they have a strong left hand, especially a strong right hand grip, that's an issue. That's not a good pattern to have. But we're going to talk about first how he makes his work, kind of how it evolved over time. And again, to be clear, these days I'm probably more of a consultant. I'm not traveling calls out there with DJ about every event now. I help him when I go down to Florida and traveled with him quite a bit in his early career and still help him. But I just want to make sure I give Claude credit, because it's not fair to sit here and act like I'm the only guy helping Dustin's success. But let me, if you guys can bear with me, I'm going to do some, try to share some screens here. And if you, let me just move back out of that. Give me 1 second. All right, I'm getting there. Hang with me. I thought we were going to do a little practice round this morning, so I all right, my apologies.
Don't worry about it. That was good.
All right, so let's just kind of go through DJ swing. So this was at Augusta last year. Not a great ball striking week, but so one of the key things that is why this pattern, I probably wouldn't teach it to people, and we'll talk about why. There's some elements of it that are super important maybe for everyone, but this pattern is a little more challenging. So we can see one key element here is this first move. All right, so it's really important for Dustin is, and again, I don't have this conversation at all with Dustin. I've never told him these things. But as for his right arm structure, the flexibility that DJ has in his shoulders is what makes his pattern work.
Sorry, Alan, sorry for to cut you off. There seems to be something with the presentation. You mind maybe restarting the presentation mode? It seems like it's loading, so we don't see it.
Okay, let me play through this here. Yeah, and I got these videos in another area if I got to share them. Is that
maybe you can just I think you went to this the presentation mode. Maybe you can just kind of go back to the presentation, restart it again. That should be good enough. Maybe there's some sort of lag or some sort of, you can't upload that quickly.
okay? Are you able to see that?
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay. How about now the video?
Yeah, that was good.
Okay. All right. So sorry, then it's going to be a little smaller for our viewers. But again, one of the most important things is for him is that first move, believe it or not. So if anyone tried to tell him maybe a one-piece takeaway or try to change that into some model teaching, we may have never heard of Dustin. So this little move of forward pressing, he gets his right arm pushed closer to his left, his right arm kind of sets his right arm early, and that's what enables him to keep his arms very close together at the top of the swing. So if we look more at this pattern, obviously this video is not cooperating. We can see how close, and this is actually a little further apart than normal. He can, with his mobility, he can really get the inside of his arms close together, and especially his wrist. So if anyone tried that, you will know right away if you have the flexibility or not. It is very challenging to do. Okay, one other key kind of starting piece is, I know this is hard to see in the video, but he has his right hand extremely high up on his left thumb. Okay, so that actually in itself gets the inside of your wrist closer together. So that's something that's, I would say, fairly uncommon in the grip world, probably on the PGA Tour or any tour, is how high his lifeline sits up on his thumb. But that's what enables him to get the inside of his arms close together, and that's what really drives his lead wrist into more flexion in the swing. So it's just, I'm kind of explaining what he does because there's certain things you got to leave alone. You don't just say, oh, stop pushing your hands forward. He needs to do that at address. That's kind of a key for him, his little trigger to kind of set his right arm and get his inside of his arms close. And that's what leads to a lot of his wrist flexion in the golf swing. Let me just, so here's another picture. I'll just let it play. Let me know if you can't see this.
No, it's all good. We can see it.
Okay. But that first move, he's had that forever. And if anyone might have taken that out of his swing, he would probably, I don't think he would have a flat lead wrist. All right. But he definitely wouldn't probably be as flexed as he is at the top. As you can see, so what's key things for him? Obviously, for this pattern, you're going to have to be pretty flexible, especially in this left lat. You can see how stretched that lat is. You're obviously going to have a lot of right side bend because you're having to keep your right arm bent longer for that wrist pattern. Your body's going to have to be able to rotate. That's obviously a key ingredient. If he's probably one of the more open players, I would say, at Impact. That's a key ingredient for him. He's got to be able to open. He's got to always keep his right shoulder moving through. As all instructors know, the more the right shoulder goes down and back, there's a better chance that right arm is going to straighten out quicker. So he is actually probably one thing I would say is a common theme, and is he's always trying to get up onto his left foot more and get his right shoulder more through the shot, in the most simple words, to enable that right arm to maintain that bend to support that lead wrist. But I would say this position right here is what probably disqualifies most of the folks that we're teaching every day. To have that flexibility to be able to open and tilt is an extremely challenging move. And I'm sure everyone knows how hyper mobile Dustin is, and especially in his lats and his shoulders. That's why he's able to be so successful with this pattern. The good thing about this pattern is obviously it's a very passive release. There's not a lot of face closure. So obviously he's going to have pretty good success, especially with his irons in proximity to the hole. Is that good for everyone? You know, some players, I don't think this is a low speed pattern. If someone doesn't have a lot of speed, I doubt I would put them in the flexion and trying to get them to open and maintain right arm bend. The limitations of his model would be, of course, around the greens. And I know James is going to come on later today. He obviously has forgotten more than I know about short game. But to allow the club to start overtaking our hands is a pretty important part of pitching successfully. So there's some things that he has to do that may be a little different than the next guy on the range when he's around the greens. You know, one is he'll probably open the club face a lot more than the next guy, just in case his lead wrist goes into flexion. He still kind of has a decent amount of bounce on the club to be able to have good turf interaction, especially on fairway cut grass, for example. Is there any questions so far?
Yeah, I think certainly there will be a lot of them. One thing I would be curious to ask, you mentioned the kind of the flexibility that disqualifies 90% of the golfers to trying to replicate a sort of a pattern of swing like that. For Dustin, is it something that has been kind of developed over time, or obviously there's some innate athletic ability that's there, but is it a point of emphasis also in his training to maintain that mobility and flexibility throughout his body to kind of execute something like that?
Well, he definitely, he's not getting younger. You know, he's 38 now. So, you know, he's in the gym a lot. In the early years, no, he's just always been hypermobile. This is all Dustin. It's not someone hanging a banner on this. I mean, it's from day one. I remember when we tested him, his mobility, I mean, he was just off the charts and everything. And, you know, it was quite embarrassing to watch how flexible the things he could do, where maybe the next person has to work at it every day to try to get close to where he's at. So there was never, you know, in college, you know, I was fortunate to coach him in college as well. And there was some yoga, but there was never some direct intent. Hey, you're going to have to get more mobile to swing like that. He just being, like you said, an athlete, he's just had that mobility. In yoga, he can do every pose that the top yoga people could do. It's quite impressive. So there's a lot of things behind the scenes. You know, I know it's a trend when certain players play well. A lot of teachers want to teach their pattern. Unfortunately, this one there's a lot more that goes to it. And I never, you know, of course, we're trying to get rid of someone having a lot of left wrist extension in the top of their swing. That's a challenging pattern as well. But you definitely don't, I mean, if you don't have shoulder mobility and you don't have hip flexor mobility and some lat mobility, then to be able to get in that amount of side bend is quite a challenge. Ironically, all patterns, there has to be a maintenance, because you can overdo something, of course. So if he starts getting his lead wrist more vertical, or I'm sorry, his lead arm more vertical, and he goes into more flexion, then he's going to have to right side bend even more. Well, when you start doing that, now he starts tilting back too much, and the right arm starts straightening and quick, and he starts hitting some lefts that he just hates and despises seeing it start anywhere left. So, you know, he has certain cues that he knows he has to do when he's not hitting it his best to make this pattern work.
Yeah. And let's say if there would be a player, an amateur or young junior player that wanted to replicate his swing, kind of try to simulate or emulate some of the tendencies that he does, would there be any drills that you would suggest the player to do to try to develop that capability to execute such a pattern?
The capability of having that amount of flexion with that vertical of the left arm at the top.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, then you're talking about drills that's going to keep the inside of your arms close together. Again, young juniors have that mobility. When that right arm starts abducting more behind you and starts getting wider, it's really hard not to drive that lead wrist into extension. So keeping that close together, the inside of your arms, is obviously, I would say, step one if you want to have more flexion in your lead wrist.
And obviously, having a little bit more flexed wrist is something that's we also see the young players like Victor Hovland do as well. If you would compare him to DJ, would you see that there's some unique aspects around what DJ does compared to Hovland, or any other of the young players that are having more flexed wrist at the top and keeping that flexion and releasing it just before impact? Are there some commonalities, or is there aspects where DJ is unique even compared to those guys?
Well, I think it's definitely the structure. I think Victor, his right elbow's pretty much under his hands at the top of his swing. So that really enables that right shoulder to really go into a lot more external rotation and transition, which is, and we'll see this here. I apologize for not being able to slow play this. But, and I'll put Rory up here beside a Dustin here in a second, but the amount of how much their right shoulder drives even more into external rotation definitely would be something similar for both of them, because having to keep that right arm bent longer to match up that lead wrist. So I'm sure I'm not overly familiar with Victor's swing, but I'm sure he opens up, and I'm sure there's going to be limitations to every pattern. Where it is in your bag is sometimes a choice that you make of what pattern you teach. So, for Victor, it may be around the greens, where the flexion of the lead wrist, that's just a very challenging move to flex your lead wrist and try to get that wrist back into extension on a shorter motion. So shorter swings, a swing, I would say if your club face isn't square, a longer swing's or your wrist isn't flat, longer swing probably is better, so you have more time to organize it on the downswing. But I don't know if I answered your question, but I would say definitely how much their arms probably rotate in transition in the downswing is pretty vital to support that lead wrist position.
Yeah, and one question we have from the audience around the release of the DJ swing. So is the DJ focused on holding off the release or releasing it freely through impact as he's making the swing?
Well, he likes, he feels like if he has a shorter arm finish, that it makes him get his right shoulder through the ball better, and not lean back, if that makes sense to your viewer. So this might have been a little bit of a flighted shot he was hitting, but he feels like he hits his flighted shots well, kind of not a hold off. That's not what he's trying to do. It's just that he may feel like he has a shorter arm finish, just so his has a bigger body finish, if you will. So if you hang back, usually you're going to see some big wrapped around finish. If you get your upper body more through the golf ball, then it's easier to kind of keep a stable, shorter, kind of a hold off look. But he's definitely, for a stock shot, he is not trying to hold off the club face. He's actually trying to feel like he lets that lead wrist get into flexion. Extension. Sorry, I'm getting on when he comes through. And I remember at one tournament at Pinehurst at the US Open, he felt like he, was getting his lead wrist, started feeling that more, and felt like, he had a great ball striking tournament just because of the focus of trying to get that wrist to extend quicker. Yeah.
Another question we had from the audience is about regarding right side bend. Could you explain a bit more? And is it something that you would recommend teachers to incorporate in every golfer's swing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if they have the mobility, we definitely want to keep them in right side bend. In a perfect world, the more we could keep a little bit of the golfer's arm bent at address, the straighter they're going to hit golf shots. But it also depends on who's standing in front of you. If a low speed person, they may need that right arm to straighten as fast as possible. And if that right arm's straightening fast, they don't want to have right side bend, or they're going to put it in the ground. So it's really based on the golfer. But if a golfer has decent flexibility and has decent speed, then yeah, we want right side bend for sure. Yeah, I mean, I would say most of our over the top, whatever that word means, but the player that shifts their arms out and the club out and hits toe swipes, they're usually doing that for a reason. It's usually some structure in the backswing. I mean, the downswing takes a quarter of a second, so it's better to fix the backswing, the reason why they're moving it. But usually if they're not in right side bend, there's a reason. I'm probably not a huge fan of, I do teach fixed impact positions just for awareness, but I am a strong proponent of that it's something back up the chain that's causing them not to be in that position at impact. And I spend more time trying to fix the calls. When you start working impact fixed positions, that's important for education and body awareness, but they're never going to get into that position if the club face and their arm structure is not going to support it.
Yeah. One thing our viewers asked is, have you had the opportunity to measure DJ swing with a HackMotion? And if yes, if there was anything specific or outlining that you've seen in the measurement you take, if you were able to take it.
That's top secret information. I'm just kidding. Well, obviously, you know, how much his wrist goes into flexion is off the charts. I think you guys, Scott did a presentation. I sent Scott some data of Dustin when he did kind of 3 different wrist patterns a couple years back. I think it's on HackMotion website. And so everyone could easily give that a look. That was with a 7 or 6 iron. I can't remember that data. But you can see, I mean, compared to most guys who's probably more maybe extended and moving toward flexion and a lot more lead arm supination, it's going to be almost completely opposite on the charts when you're looking at it. So, but of course, I mean, he's known for that bow lead wrist, so that's obviously what's going to stand out most on the graphs. And then how fast it starts to extend, I think would probably, of course, stand out because one has to go with the other.
And another question from the audience regarding the attack angle of the club. If you follow the DJ's wrist pattern, does that make the attack angle more steep? And is that something to consider or work on for a player with such a wrist motion pattern?
Yeah, there's a good chance because your lead wrist goes into flexion and you have that amount of shaftling, there is going to be more downward. But that's why it's important for that, or the attack angle, to be more down. But that's the reason why it's an important pattern to make sure the swing direction's moving left. If they had that pattern and it was neutral, or even for a 7 iron, even only 4 left swing direction, you know, he hit it all over the place. So if you're going to have that, you know, Brooks hits really down on it with his wrist pattern. I'm not sure of Collins' numbers, but you know, Dustin's 9-10 down on a wedge, an 80-yard wedge shot. So, you know, obviously he has to maybe stay in forward flexion a little bit longer to keep the right shoulder and right arm. But again, he can overdo that and start hitting too down on it. And he'll have to start kind of working on maybe because he's got to use his body to get that handle moving up. So he sometimes may have to work on that a little bit, but that's a rare occasion. But no, he definitely hits down on it. I mean, his stock shot, he's probably 1.5 down with a driver. But again, that's going to be based on speed. If you guys swinging 90 with a driver, I'm not sure this is best pattern for him, because somehow he's going to have to try to figure out how to swing up on the golf ball with a flex lead wrist, and that can get really crooked. Yeah.
When it comes to some specific drills that maybe you could suggest for players, are there anything specific drills that you could suggest to learn to rotate more like DJ does in his swing that where players can work on?
Well, I know, early extension became kind of a cult word maybe 10 years ago. So there's a zillion drills out there, people trying to keep their butt against the wall. Some people need to extend, but I think it's more can be attacked easier in the gym than a particular drill to get someone to open. Because now we're talking about ground forces, and that's a whole other seminar. So of how to get someone opening. You have to make sure that you're pressuring down in that lead side pretty hard. So you get some forces to help you open up. That I would say you're kind of doing it more with, I'd try to get people opening up more by using the ground and pressuring at the right time, than actually just trying to yank their hips open. Or if we do anything, ground forces are good for the lower body, but sometimes the upper body still lags behind on the opening piece. So we'll do some drills where, because you don't want to, he can't be closed at impact. I mean, with his shoulders, that's like the worst thing possible. So not him specifically, but if you see a client that's not opening up enough, there's a ton of drills out there, but the one that we've probably had the most success with is just doing the old drill where you put a alignment stick under their trail arm and get them working on turning that towards this target to start the transition, not letting it move up to the sky, but actually moving it toward the target, or grab a bungee cord and pull it from behind you and attach an alignment stick under your torso or under your arms, or you can put it over the top of your shoulders and just work on getting that to turn left of the target to start the downswing, and make sure that that stick doesn't move up to the sky. Because if it moves up to the sky with this pattern of in the backswing, then you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah. Another question we had from the audience is regarding loft. Can you explain what is the difference between a static loft and dynamic loft with the DJ's pattern?
Well, there's not his difference between static and dynamic aren't different. Are you saying the change of static to dynamic, how big of a change it is?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just say with a 7-iron, I kind of look more at launch angles. I don't really look so much at dynamic loft anymore with him, but he's probably around 15 launch angle. Tour average is probably with a 7-iron 16 and a half-ish, low 16s. So he doesn't hit it as low as people may think he does. But loft is a concern for this pattern. And that's why the strength involved with this pattern, I think, is important to have if you're going to prescribe this to someone. I think, again, the athleticism of how, having hands that can really try to get that flexion or extension, back in the lead wrist is an important part of that pattern as well. But I apologize. I don't know exactly his 7-iron static loft versus his dynamic loft at separation of the ball is, but I can get that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's obviously kind of a very nuanced number, so it's all good. One thing, kind of maybe a bit more general question as we kind of wrap up. Just from a coaching standpoint, how difficult it is to shape or develop shots when player has this sort of wrist pattern like a DJ does versus something that's more common of having extension at the top and kind of taking it down, moving into flexion at impact. Like from a coaching standpoint, how hard it is to work on the swing, to kind of develop the other parts of the swing to make it work, and specifically at that level, right?
Yeah, that's, Dustin makes a lot of us look really smart. But that's a great question, because this is a fade pattern, maybe even a push fade pattern, some days. So I would say for him, he hit it right to left most of his life. So, we've got it made pretty easy. He kind of knows how to do that. He knows that brings in a pull hook, so he doesn't work on it much. But I would say he would probably do it more if I'm answering that question. He would do it more with his lead arm position, like if it's more up or if it's more, let's say, neutral. Now, he may not know he does that, but when I watch him hit draws and cuts, the elevation of his arm is what changes. If not, if you try to hit a draw from a flex lead wrist and a vertical lead arm, you're going to have to really tilt back a lot. And he may do that sometimes, but usually he instinctively changed the elevation of his arm and his backswing. But he tries not to hit many draws if he can. Butch did a great job of convincing him to finally play a cut. So he's had a lot of success, and he's almost allergic to the left side of the golf course now. He just doesn't even want to go over there.
Yeah. Well, Alan, I do appreciate you taking the time. I think it was very insightful for us to explore kind of such a nuanced swing and work on such a specific case example. But I do appreciate you taking the time. I think it was very interesting and very exciting for all the viewers, for us here. So thank you, and I appreciate your time.
Well, I'm glad I was able to tee Hank up and make him look even smarter than he is. So you're welcome, Hank. Good luck to you, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. All right. That was pretty exciting, pretty interesting. Talking with Alan Terrell about DJ's golf swing and what the wrist pattern is like for him. I think we are ready to go with our next conversation for today. Before we kick it off, let me introduce our next speaker. And he is a professional golf instructor. He has instructed PGA golf players that we can measure in the hundreds. Kind of the couple of his most well-known students include Marco O'Meara as well as Tiger Woods. He has been listed as one of the top golf coaches on Golf Magazine and Golf Digest for multiple times and multiple different types of lists. And what was very exciting about him, I read this fact that his students have won every major golf tournament, including the Masters, US Open, British Open, and PGA Championship. So that's quite a resume. And we welcome in Hank Haney for our next conversation. Hank, are you here? Hank is here. He's I think he's kind of fidgeting a bit. All right, we have him live.
Mute.
Yeah, we can hear you. Hank. I think your microphone nav's on.
You got me?
Yeah, I got you.
What about my picture? Can you see me?
I think you need to turn off the screen share. I think you have it on right now.
Turn off
On the
the
bottom.
what?
turn off the screen sharing.
Okay.
I think we see your screen. I think once we have that off, we can we'll be able to see you. All right, and probably where the microphone on the bottom is, you can turn on the video.
There you go.
And
There we
he's
are.
here. Hey Hank, how are you doing?
I am good. How you doing?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Nice, great to have you. Obviously, we have this set up just last week, so appreciate you taking the time and joining us today.
Well, it's my pleasure. It's always fun whenever I get to talk about golf.
Yeah, what's better than to start off the Monday morning than golf, right?
Exactly.
So for this conversation, the structure is going to be a bit different. We're going to keep it a little more conversation-like. We're going to go through kind of a series of questions, kind of pick Hank's brain a bit in terms of how should a golfer, train specific things around the golf swing, maybe explore some practical drills that he would suggest. So trying to keep it as entertaining and educational as possible for our viewers. And before we start, maybe I can kind of pick us off with a very kind of a general question. When you, Hank, are working with a student, let's say if someone walks in and you're starting that process, what is the process for you in analyzing a golfer's swing, and what's the process of identifying the areas where you need improvement? Like what is kind of your typical go-to strategy when it comes to that?
Good question. Go-to strategy for me is always fixing their big miss. Whatever that student's big miss is, that is my first point that I'm always on. Because to me, there are three things you have to do to play better golf. Number one, you have to eliminate penalty strokes. Number two, you have to eliminate what I call two chips. So anytime you get around the green in close proximity, you have to get the ball on the green in one shot. And then number three, you have to eliminate three putts. So first on that list is penalty shots. And to fix penalty shots, you have to fix that person's big miss. Now with a touring pro, that big miss might happen just, once a round, once a tournament. It might just happen at a bad time. But for amateur golfers, it's a shot that typically happens quite often. So I fix the big miss first. Whatever the big miss is, fix their big miss, then on to the next big miss, then on to the next big miss, because everybody has a miss. There isn't anybody who plays a game that doesn't have a shot that bothers them. So it's analyzing first their ball flight. Golf is what the ball does. Everything you do with the club, everything you do with your body, everything you do with your hands is all to get the golf club to do something different in order to get the ball to do something different. So my first thing that I always look at is what are we trying to fix here? Do they hit the ball too high? Do they hit the ball too low? Do they slice it? Do they hook it? What is their big miss? And that's always my point of start right there. And if you fix their bad shot, you lower their scores. It's really that simple.
Yeah, and what is that process for you like? Is it just simple as, like, let's say 20 swings and you just look at the ball flight data, look at the swing, and then you already kind of see where the problem lies?
Well, when you can look at one swing, usually you don't even need a swing. I mean, you can look at a setup. So if you see somebody that's set up and they're set up underneath it like this, you have an idea that they have a history of hooking the ball. If you see somebody that's set up and the club face, for instance, is just a little bit closed, even if the club face is turned in just a tiny bit and they're set up a little high with their backside, they're probably a slicer. So sometimes you don't even need a swing. I mean, I'll ask them, what is your big miss? Because I want to get an idea of what they think their bad shot is. And, sometimes people will say, oh, Hank, I hit it everywhere. And I'm like, well, we can't fix everywhere. We have to fix one shot or the other. Okay. The way that you get out of missing everywhere is to fix one side of the golf course. And, Al was talking about that too, when he was talking about Dustin, and, he doesn't want to hook it. He wants to hit that little fade, and, because that draw he feels can turn into a big duck hook. And that's the same thing with everybody who plays the game. Most people that play the game, 90% of people that play golf, they slice. So, you know, that's where your product is so important because they have a club face problem, and it has to do with their hands getting in the right position coming into the golf ball and throughout the swing in order to get them into that impact position. But the first thing I'll do is I will ask them about their ball flight, the students, and then I'll make an observation based on their shots. Now, maybe they are hitting the ball great when they're there with me for a lesson. Maybe they're better players and they're hitting the ball great. So the thing that I'll look at then is I'll say, okay, which shot is easier for you to play? Can you fade the ball? Can you draw the ball? If you are in a position in your swing where all you can do is hit a draw, but you can't hit a fade, that's not a great position because, like Alan was pointing out earlier, that draw will soon turn into a hook. That fade will soon turn into a slice. So I think it's important that you be able to hit the ball both ways, that you can hit it right to left, you can hit it left to right. And the reason that you have to be able to do that is, one, to be able to play the game, because ideally at the highest level, you want to be able to work the ball to different pin placements. And at even at a lower level, you want to be able to fix your misses, okay? And the way that you do that is you have to hit the ball in both directions. Sam Snead made a great comment. He said, when he hooks the ball on the golf course, he'll play with it, and then he goes to the driving range and he cuts it for a half hour. And they said, well, what do you do when you're cutting it too much? He said, well, I play with it on the course, because that's what I got going that day. And then I go to the driving range and I hook it for a little while. If you don't have the ability to hit both shots, then you don't have the ability to get yourself going down a straight and narrow path. And that straight and narrow path is one where you're hitting the ball in the fairway or close to it, but not hitting a big miss either way. And the big miss is the big problem. That's the shot that everybody has to fix. So I'll analyze it and see their big miss when they hit. Generally, I want to know what's their bad shot with a driver, because that's the club that's going to curve the most. And they'll do it with every club, but it'll curve the most with a driver. And then what I'll do from there is I'll ask them, and then I watch them, and then I'll have them try to hit different shots and see which shots they can hit and which shots they can't hit if they're a little bit higher level player.
Yeah. You mentioned before that like 90% of the golfers struggle with slicing the ball.
Yep.
And obviously that's a common question, and that we have had also throughout our work in the golf space. What would be your process of fixing the slice, and specifically with the wrist motion and managing the club face as well with that? Like, what would be your process of, let's say I'm an amateur golfer, I come to you for advice. What would be that process for you how do we go about fixing it?
Well, to me, a couple things. I mean, you only slice for one reason. The club face is open relative to the path of your swing. So that means you have to get the club face more square, and you have to get the path going more into out. All right. The first thing that I always fix when my process is, I'm going to fix the club face first, because path mistakes are much easier to fix if you have a better club face. So I figure, okay, why is the club face open? Is the club face open possibly because of their grip? If their hands are on the club and they're in too weak of a position, and you get to the top of the swing and your club face is going to be wide open at the top, I'm going to look at the grip. So that would be one possibility. The next possibility would be my wrist position at the top of my swing. So if my wrist is in a cupped position at the top of the swing, that is going to open the club face. So it's really boils down to grip and wrist position, and you track it throughout the swing. Is it too open at address? Is it too open in the middle of the swing? Is it too open at the top of the swing? Is it too open at the start of the downswing? Some people will get it good at the top and then they'll cup it right when they start down. Or do they have it pretty good and then they come into the ball and they hit with a blocked position or a cupped position at impact. Cupped is going to give you loft. Block is going to give you the shot to the right. Typically, they're going to be both cupped and blocked. I mean, that's the typical situation. So the wrist position is going to be vital in order to get the wrist good and to get the club to be able and the hands to be able to release properly, which means coming through the ball more like this. I have to get the golf club to swing on some semblance of a plane. So if I swing the golf club and I swing the golf club on too upright of a plane, when I swing it on an upright plane, I'm always going to have a blocking motion coming into the ball. If I swing it on more of an arc, I'm going to have more of a releasing motion. Even if my arc is across the golf ball and an out to in swing, even if my arc is across the golf ball, I'm still going to be able to square the face. Now I would hit a pull hook. So I'll get them to swing the club on some arc and then get them to feel like they're squaring their wrists when they come into the ball. So with that slicer, he's got to feel, people say, do I try to do this? Do I have to think about it? Do I actively do it? You have to square your hands when you're coming into the golf ball, or you have to have them in a position that's already square, like a Dustin Johnson, John Rahm, where it's more bowed there. Now the face is already square. But if you've got that club open, it's not just going to automatically, miraculously close itself unless you try to do something. And that's one of the reasons I have a video series called the One Shot Slice Fix. And I will fix golfers' slices in one shot. And the process that I put them through is a lot of practice swings, trying to give them some drills to feel the plane of their swing, getting them to get their wrist positions in the right position, and then teaching them how to release the golf club through the golf ball with their hands, in order to get the club face to square. And then simultaneously, I'm working also on getting the path of the swing more into out. But even if I produce a good release, a good wrist position, a good club face, I produce that and the path is wrong, at least I've gotten rid of the slice. And that's the first step. I always say there's a road you take to playing good golf. Nowhere on that road is there a slice. No golfer in the history of the game of golf, not one, has ever gone from slicing to good golf. You go from slicing to hooking to good golf. You go from slicing to hooking to learning to fade it. And now you've got great golf, because now you can hit all the shots. But no one has ever gone from slicing to great golf. It's never happened in the history of the world. And people say, well, Trevino's faded the ball. Yes, but he used to be a terrible duck hooker. Ben Hogan hit fades, but he used to be a terrible duck hooker. And both of those players, when they duck hooked, were far better than any amateur golfer ever is. And even like when Alan was talking about Dustin Johnson, and he hates that hook, and that's a shot that he knows will get him in trouble, so he prefers to fade it. Absolutely. But if he hooked it, he would still be better than any amateur golfer. Way better.
And is there any difference with respect to the process you have for fixing a hook for a player? Is it simply kind of the vice versa of a slice, or there's some nuances to that that you have?
No, that's a great question. It's a great point, because if you can fix one, you should be able to fix the other, because all you're doing is the opposite. I mean, the people that are hooking have that club face too close at impact. The face is closed relative to the path of the swing. So if I'm a right-handed player, I got to get the path going more to the left, and I got to get the face open more to the right. And why is that club face closed? Grip and wrist position again. And then when you look at the plane of the swing, the more you swing on an arc, the more closing you're going to get. The more you swing on a straighter upright line, the more opening you're going to get. So if you get your student to swing more upright, you're going to have more of a blocking motion with the release through. If you get them to swing flatter, then they're going to have more closing motion. So it's just a great point you bring up. All you do is just try to feel the opposite.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. And in your opinion, because you've been around golf for a very long time, are there some misconceptions about the golf swing mechanics that are out there that kind of the amateur players tend to follow? Have you seen some kind of trends or some sort of kind of a general patterns that the players essentially are following that are essentially wrong, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, there's always misconceptions, but there's a lot of different ways to do things. So I don't worry so much about all the different ways that people are trying to swing. I just worry about fixing the flight of the golf ball. For amateur golfers, though, if you can focus on just a few things that will influence the golf club, that's the number one thing. You have to be able to influence the golf club. If you influence the golf club, you will change your ball flight. So how do you influence your golf club? Your hands are holding on to the club. Your hands are attached to your arms. Your arms are attached to your shoulders. So that means hands, arms, shoulders. Those are the points that I'm going to look at that are going to be the most beneficial. When people are hyper focused on their feet or their knees or their hips, well, I mean, your hands are holding on to the golf club and the golf club is hitting the golf ball. So yeah, you can do something different with your feet. And it's not that I don't tell people to do something with their feet or their legs, but that is only going to influence the ball if your feet, knees, hips, if they do something to change what the golf club's doing. But ultimately, it boils down to the fact that your hands are holding on to the golf club. And that's going to influence the golf ball. So when the amateurs are worried about, this or that, I'm swaying, I'm not doing this with my hips or my knees or my, and I'm like, let's not lose sight of the fact that the club is hitting the ball. So you've got to focus some point on that. And if you don't, you're not going to get results.
Yeah. One thing you already touched upon slightly was the grip of the club, and as that being obviously one of the only things that truly kind of affects the club that's in your hands. And we've had this question around what kind of grip should a person have. What is your take on general suggestion? What type of grip should a player aim for? And when it kind of specifically a case for a weak grip, is it something that you should try to fix always and aim for a stronger one? Or what's your opinion about what kind of grip a golfer should have in the golf swing?
Your grip needs to match your swing. It's just as simple as that. There's not people say, "Hey, would you look at my grip?" And my thought is, and my answer is, are we writing a book or are we fixing your swing? Okay. Because what maybe technically looks like a great grip, okay, that's a technically great grip. It's a technically neutral grip. Okay, then that only works with a neutral swing. So there's not one grip for every swing. There's the one there, you can't just have one grip and this is going to work for everybody. No, there has to be slight adjustments that you can make. Now, in an ideal situation, I might believe that I like to have everybody grip it like this. But that doesn't mean when I coach everybody to grip it like that. I have to give them some relief because you want to fix the golf ball. So if I turn the grip in a little stronger position, it makes it easier for people to close the face. And most people leave it open. So until they get to the point where they're maybe hooking the ball too much, I'm going to give them a little bit of relief. I'm not going to give them a grip that's way over here to compensate for their poor wrist positions. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them a little bit of help, just a little bit of help to help them square the club face. Now, as far as the weak grip is concerned, well, I mean, the weak grip is one where your hands are turned on top of the club, and that matches up better with a wrist position that's a little more bowed. So your grip and your grip matches your swing. It matches your wrist position, and it matches the plane of your swing. So if you have a bowed wrist position, you're going to have a closed club face. If you put a bowed wrist position with a flat swing, you are going to hit big duck hooks. If you have a bowed wrist position and you have a more upright swing, Dustin Johnson, John Rahm gets that arm up. They've got a bowed position, but they've got their arm up and not back around over here. So you see players that have it back around over here. If they have a cupped wrist, well, they have a chance to square the club face. An upright swing with a cupped wrist will not work. A flat swing with a bowed wrist will not work. And the wrist position and the grip matches up with the swing and the swing plane. So that's the balance that you have to strike. And I don't believe you want to get too far off on anything. You know, you don't want a grip to make up for your bad swing. You don't want, you know, a wrist position to make up for your bad swing. Everything needs to be fairly neutral if you're going to have a repeatable swing. That's best for most people.
Yeah. One thing, obviously, given that our focus is around the wrists and the golf swing, kind of one of the feels we get that sometimes the people try to follow is they want to be flat at the top of the backswing, and they want to be obviously flat at impact. Is that ultimately the goal the players should try to have in terms of their wrist pattern? Or you would suggest something else that they should try to follow?
I mean, you want to have a neutral situation at impact. Okay. To me, slightly turned, slightly bowed wrist, ever so slightly. If I bow it too much, I'm de-lofting the golf club. And then I either have to lean back like that, or I have to have a tremendous amount of club head speed, which a lot of amateur golfers don't have, in order to get the ball in the air. So that's a problem. If you have it in a flat position at the top and you have it in a flat position at the bottom, you're going to find it easier to be more consistent. That's what all this, you know, I've watched 70,000 golfers, giving them lessons. That's a position that's going to be easiest for them to hit, but that's not what everybody's going to be in. So some people are going to be a little cupped. Some people might be a little bit bowed, and those will all work. But you don't want to get too drastic either way. But I think you're shooting for, you know, a fairly flat wrist position at the top. You know, people say, well, you don't want to teach everybody the same swing. Not everybody's going to have the same swing. It doesn't matter what you teach them. They're not going to have the same swing. But I think, yes, I think you want a more neutral position. And that's going to make it easier for most players. If they're off, there's only two ways you can be off. Either you're going to be too cupped, or you're going to be too bowed. And if you're bowed, then you have to either have a tremendous amount of speed, lean back a lot, or you've got to change that position at impact in order to neutralize it. If you're cupped, then you got a problem where now you've got to make a quick turn to release to get that back to square and impact. Not that won't work, but then, you know, people will always follow up with the next question saying, Hank, how can I be more consistent? And it's harder when you're changing your angles a lot. And that's why I'm so intrigued with your products, because I love what it is able to teach people. And I think that this is something that I really feel like instruction has missed out on a lot. I really feel like, you know, this idea that you just hold on to the club and you just, you know, somehow this everything just happens, and that just isn't reality. That just isn't the way it works. You know, I grew up, you know, I first started coaching. I loved Ben Hogan's book, The 5 Lessons, The Modern Fundamentals of Golf. And in his book, he says, your hands actively do nothing. And then And then he went to great lengths to have some of the most fantastic drawings that have ever appeared in any book, where he showed exactly what your hands do, what your release is like, what the hand position is like. The most iconic drawings maybe ever in a golf instruction book. Hogan's release with his hand coming into the ball. Okay. And yet in the book, it says your hands actively do nothing, but it goes to great lengths to show you exactly what the hands do. Okay. And I always thought that book was mistitled. That was my favorite book, but I thought it was mistitled. I thought it should have been How Not to Hook by Ben Hogan. Okay, because Ben Hogan hooked the ball. So he said your hands actively do nothing, but that's coming from somebody who's always hooked the ball, and he's trying not to hook the ball. But 90%, at least 90% of golfers who play the game, they slice the ball and they don't play well. And if they think of their hands actively do nothing, if they don't address their grip and their wrist positions, if they don't address that, they have no chance to play better golf. No chance.
Yeah. When it comes to those specific cases, again, about the slicing and the amateur golfers, what they should do, is there, which obviously is also somewhat of there's an extension in their wrists at impact that opens the club face. Are there any specific drills to fixing specifically that you could suggest, or training methods that have been helpful, or maybe what should the amateur players do to just improve that? Are there any tips you would have for them?
Well, obviously the thing that is the best is if you can put your hands on someone, and I will physically show you what the feel is like. Everybody learns they learn from feeling something, they learn from seeing it, and they learn from the spoken word. The worst way to learn is from the spoken word, because you have to take those words and transfer them into feelings and thoughts. Okay. So if you can capture a feel, that's number one. So like you said, drills are good. What's the specific drill for learning to do square your hands? I'll have people work on a impact situation. Maybe it's an impact bag. Maybe they're tapping the back of their bag, the bottom of their bag, and just work on this little drill right here, just to teach them how I want them to do this. Even just taking your lead hand and just working on doing this. Understanding that the back of your hand is your club face. Essentially, if you hit with the side of your hand, you're leaving it open. If you hit with the back of the hand, you're square. If you cupped, you're adding loft. Okay. If you bow, you're de-lofting. Just understanding that there's loft, there's no loft, there you're open, there you're closed. And understand that if you can square the back of your lead hand to the target at impact and slightly turn your knuckles down so that you reduce the loft, that is where you're going to get your best chance to square the face, to get a powerful hit, and to get ball turf contact. So I will have people just do this right here. Just something just as simple as this. If you can start off and you can do this, then you can work your way into the swing doing that. And then the other point they always make is I try to get people to do it a little earlier, because with those people that slice, they're too late. See, everyone eventually it squares. People don't go like this through the golf ball. Eventually, everyone will square it. They'll be open, they're open, and it squares. Eventually it squares, but it's too late. It has to happen earlier. It has to happen back here more. So that's my point with slicers, is do it back here. If you do it too early, you get a hook. When you get the hook, then we know, okay, that's too early, do it a little later. Yeah, that's the way that I do it.
Yeah, and when in your experience working with the pro players, have you ever had a case example of a bad wrist pattern in their swing, and what was the process for fixing it in your experience?
Always trying to do the opposite. Always trying to do the opposite. I mean, the wrist position in the swing is it's not have I ever. It is always part of what I'm working on. Always. It's not have I ever had. It's I have always had. Because that is the thing that you're trying to get. So the number one thing with professionals is, to me, they tend to get the club back behind them. This is a better player's mistake. The club is behind them coming into the ball, so now it's too shallow. The bottom of the swing is going to be behind the ball, and they're going to tend to cross over. Better players tend to hook. High handicap golfers tend to come down like this. They're doing the opposite. They're coming out to in, it faces too open, wrist is too cupped. Better players tend to do the opposite. They tend to get the club coming back in behind them there. I always try to work in the opposite motion. So when I see somebody that has the club coming down in here too much, generally what I'm going to see is I'm going to see someone who's across the line at the top. And when you're across the line, you're going to tend to drop it in there. So it goes from across the line to there. And I will work on getting them to be more laid off at the top. Feel they point the club more to the left with their wrist in a flatter position. So I'll get them to point it over there, wrist in a flatter position, and then actually feel like in the downswing that they're almost producing a little bit more cup, and then they can square it there. So it will look more like that as they rehearse, as opposed to somebody that goes in, across, and then dropped in like that. Those are the two patterns that you'll see. I mean, the thing that you realize in instruction is, and you brought up the point, when you asked about the hooking versus slicing, it's not, there's not 100 different patterns. It's really two. And you fix them. If you fix those two, you fixed everybody. See? Yeah.
And one of the things with your experience working with a lot of pro players, obviously, you've been part of their process of developing practice routines, working on different things around their swing.
Right.
Is there anything that you could suggest for an amateur player, what they should try to copy from a pro in developing their own practice routine, and how should they think about constructing their own practice routine? Is it about fixing the biggest issues? Is it trying to be consistent in a part of fixing a certain problem? How should they think about constructing their practice routine to kind of get the most out of their time playing golf?
To me, a big part of what I do is practice swings. I like somebody to be able to first, if the first thing they can do is make a good, correct practice swing. That would be number one. Like when you're swinging and you're swinging 100 miles an hour and you're hitting a ball, it's much more difficult to do. But if you take a good practice swing, if you can make a good practice swing and just do it slowly, a slow practice swing. I used to have Tiger hit balls, and he'd hit drivers 100 yards on the driving range. And so he showed up in a tournament one time, did that, and people looked at him like, what is he doing? But he was feeling what he was doing in his swing and rehearsing it. That is the first step, I think, for amateurs to start to feel what they need to do different. When you can't do it in full motion and full speed, you have to break it down. and you break it down into parts and you break it down in speed. So first things first, maybe they have a problem with their takeaway. Their hands are rolling to the inside too much. I'm going to get them to work on that takeaway. Action and reaction. Everything you do in the takeaway influences the backswing. Everything in the backswing influences the top of the swing. Top of the swing influences how you're going to start the club down. So working on parts and doing it slowly. So working on parts, doing it slowly, and then slowly make a swing without the parts. And then a little faster, a little faster, a little faster. That to me is the best way to do it. Either practicing in front of a mirror and rehearsing what you're doing is a great way to do it. You get the mirror back there, you practice and rehearse. But you have to have an understanding of what it is you're looking at. You don't, a lot of people don't know what they're looking at. But if you can practice in front of a mirror, that's great. And then, have an instructor there that can move you like I do. I move people. So I give them a feel for what they're doing. I don't sit back and just tell them what to do. I move them. I show them the feeling of what they're doing. I move their hands and arms in the club and their wrist position and make it exactly what it's supposed to feel like, so they can feel what they're doing. And then, the next step is being able to have something that will help you feel it. And your product does that. I mean, that's why I've been intrigued about your product. I mean, I ran across your product and sent you an email, and that's how I'm on here today. It's not like I'm not an endorser. I'm just intrigued with how your product can help people play better golf. Okay. And being able to feel what you're doing is what everybody has to do. So how can you feel it? These are intricate wrist positions and positions in the swing. You're not going to be able to just feel this. You have to see it. So you watch yourself do it. And that's one way to do it, but you have to know what it is you're looking at. Okay. And then you feel it because you can see it, you can feel it. Another way is to have an instructor that can position you and move you around so you can feel it. And then your product helps you do this as well. And the thing is that takes the place of having me there to give you the feel. If I'm there and I have my hands on you, I can get you to feel it every time. The idea that I can just give you some drill, because everybody says the same thing and you ask the same question. Hank, what are the drills you could use to fix this or to do this or to do that? Slow practice swings, watching yourself do it, feeling it, or getting some feedback, from an instructor or, from your HackMotion product. I mean, that's why that's a good product. I mean, I know that people can learn better when they feel it. And other than that, it's not likely to happen. Until they capture the feel, that change is not going to happen. And the problem you have is, like Tiger always said, he says, there's a big difference between feel and real. So you feel something, but is that really what's happening?
Yeah, that's a good line to have. My question to you would be, and we're opening up also the Q&A for the audience. In your experience working with Tiger Woods, was there ever a case where you needed to adjust his wrist angles and it was a grip wrist angle adjustment you made for him to play a better golf?
Yeah, that was a big part of it, because when he would struggle, he couldn't hit all the different shots, and he would get the club coming into the ball too much from here. He had the club more across the line at the top. So I would get him to be more upright here, get the club more in front of him here, so the wrist is actually a little bit more cupped, if you will, there. And that keeps the club out in front of him, as opposed to being bowed here. So that was a position we worked on, always making sure the takeaway was in check. Same thing when you're pitching a ball. If you're pitching, I might even have him be more there. But he would be out in front of him. Then at the top, we worked on getting the club more to the left and the wrist flatter at the top, okay? And then I actually would have him try to feel like when he started down, he would actually put a little cup in there. And that would get the club out in front of him where he could feel the club out in front of him, where he could work the club and the body through together. So that was a big part of fixing his ball flight and getting him to be able to hit different shots. And then hitting the low shots, the stinger shots were more of a release this way, turning the club down, hitting those low shots. And that's another wrist position, okay? And hitting through the ball like that, and then feeling like his arms would relax so that he could break the momentum. Because what happens is at some point that momentum has to break. So if it breaks up this way, you're going to hit a higher shot. And if you break the momentum this way with your arms, then you're going to hit a lower shot. So wrist position was a big part there. When you're hitting a low shot, there's the wrist position. When you're hitting a higher shot, there's more of the wrist position. Could be a pitch, could be a sand shot. I mean, you're hitting more this way. If you're hitting a higher little pitch shot, you're hitting a little more this way. If you're going to drive it down there, he would hit little low shots with a sand wedge. He did little low hooks to spin it into a hill. He did a little low fade, hitting it this way. So yeah, I mean, a big part of what he did was wrist positions.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And one final question before we let you go, and I think we've kind of, it's been very insightful for us here. When it comes to obviously different situations on the golf course with respect to the wrist angles, right? There's certain aspects when it comes to hitting a driver, and certain aspects when it comes to the short game. Are there any kind of differences that you suggest players to have in different situations on the golf course with respect to wrist angles? And how should they think about them? Like, for example, driver versus chipping, obviously could kind of be extremes. Would there be kind of general ideas or that you would suggest players to have?
Well, it all depends on the shot you're going to play. And, when you have extreme wrist angles, then certain shots are going to be harder to play. Okay, so at the tournament, the Tournament of Champions, at Century Tournament Champions, they were making a big deal. Paul Azinger was making a big deal of the fact that Colin Morikawa has a lot of rotation where he really turns his wrist down, and that makes it more difficult for him to pitch the ball, especially into the grain, where the leading edge is going to catch in the grass. So that's a perfect example of somebody doing too much of this for a particular shot. But that's also one of the reasons he's such a good iron player. So it all depends on the shot you're going to play. But yeah, the wrist angle, I mean, if you're going to put more loft, it just boils down to this is loft, that's de-lofting. This is leaving the face more open, that's closing the face. So how you're manipulating your hands through the shot is a part of the game of golf. I mean, you can have, a neutral swing, but there has to be some element of how your hands are coming. You hit a sand shot, you're hitting a sand shot, you hit more this way. When you hit a low shot, you hit more that way. You can't just hit the same way with every single shot. So you have to learn these different nuances if you want to be the absolute complete player. But for most amateur golfers, just trying to get it into a pretty neutral position, you know, I mean, if they can get in a pretty neutral position here, they're going to play so much better golf. Now, okay, how do they take it to the next level? All right, let's learn to really turn it down to hit a low one. Let's learn to not do it quite so much, to throw it up in the air a little bit more. Let's release it this way to hit a pitch shot or a lob shot or a sand shot. Let's release it that way to hit a low spinner. So those are the different changes that you'll make. But absolutely, you have to be able to hit into different wrist positions.
Yeah. Well, Hank, this was very insightful. I think there was a bunch of questions that we didn't get to that we will need to figure out how we cover afterwards, and we'll have a chat about that. But I do appreciate you taking the time, and I think it was very insightful, very interesting. And I do appreciate you again taking the time, and thank you for joining our webinar.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, and I hope everybody has a good day.
All right, thank you, Hank. Thank you. And so, Hank Haney, everyone. Yeah, so appreciate you all taking the time watching our first two conversations, both with Hank and Alan Terrell. Before that, right now we're gonna have a quick little break, after which my team member Reinholz is gonna talk about a bit more what are the things that we have learned about the golf swing, and specifically around the wrist angles through our experience working at HackMotion. And we will be right back with Reinhold's presentation.
Hi, everyone. I hope you hear me well. 1 second. Thanks a lot for coming and joining today. So what I will do in my presentation is I will focus on actually giving an overview on what we have learned over the years from HackMotion data. So there will be it will be more of an overview of what coaches who have been gathering data, measuring their players have taught us. So I'll start presentation and share my screen 1 second. Okay, so 5 lessons learned from HackMotion data. Number 1 is we have learned about 3 tour player release patterns, and this is largely thanks to a presentation by Scott Cowkes. He's a great coach from Canada, and he's 2019 Canadian Teacher of the Year, and he's coaching from junior to PGA Tour winners. And his very popular presentation, 3 common tour releases that he did in 2019 PGA show. And let's get straight to it. What is the first type of release? It's called wrist option A, which is the stable extension towards flexion. pattern with supination. And some people call it also just Tommy Fleetwood pattern. Although, of course, there are a lot of great players who play with it. And here's just a visual, and you can see that he has a very stable extension throughout the swing. And not only you can see it, because it's very hard to capture with your naked eye, we have actually measured these type of players, and what they have is the swing pattern, which is, you should be paying attention mostly to the green line, although the sensor captures all kind of different motions. You have to mainly focus on the green line being very flat from address to the top. And how this wrist motion pattern is also called is the turn down release. It is played by players like Tommy Fleetwood, also Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy. So it's the kind of standard tour player pattern. And what the players do is that impact, the speed of the club is released more with wrist rotation, which is supination rather than with wrist extension. And wrist stays in flexion a little longer. So you can see here, the blue line also, the arrow indicates that it's staying more flat longer. And we will contrast it in a bit with the other pattern, which is used by players such as Dustin Johnson. And don't worry if you don't capture everything in this presentation, because this is more of an overview, and I'll give you actual links to all the presentations that you can watch, because each of these topics is actually quite deep, and you can easily spend an hour researching each of these topics. Usually these players are great wedge players, pitchers and chippers, because they learn to control the loft of the club with the amount of flexion. And this actually showed up, interestingly, both in the presentation by Alan Terrell and with Hank Haney. They both highlighted that the players like Viktor Hovland or Dustin Johnson might sometimes struggle with some short game shots just because of how their wrists work. So this is an excellent wrist option for those who want to play a lot of different height short game shots as well. And these players are also great at hitting stingers in different shot shapes. So then in contrast to this, Scott highlighted the pattern of wrist option B, which is the flexion to extension. And it's also called Cobra pattern because of the how bent the trail hand is at the top. So DJ is a great example that everybody knows. And this is how the data looks of the wrist. And you can see that the green line actually here goes in completely opposite manner. The wrist moves towards flexion early and then release towards extension. It's almost 180 degrees opposite of stable extension pattern. And the players that use it are Dustin Johnson, Colin Morikawa, Viktor Hovland, Brooks Koepka. And what they do is they push their lead wrist into flexion in the backswing, maintain it in the downswing, and then release the flexion at impact with a movement towards extension with very little supination of the wrist. And players with hard flexion tend to play long shots very well. They're great drivers of the ball, but they tend to hit very uniform stock shots. And they can struggle with pitching and chipping as they deal off the club during the backswing, as there was the example of Viktor Hovland, something that he has to work on. And they need to get it back at impact by scooping, and they have potentially low point issues. So that's a very interesting trade-off between these two patterns. The third pattern, which I'm not going to spend too much time on, you can explore it on your own more, is the wrist option C. It's increasing radial downcock pattern, and this is also called the long hitters pattern. And here the difference is that the blue line, which is actually the radial deviation, is increasing. So what they do is they have this bit of downcock when they're starting their downswing. What these players who are those long hitters, they use their hands to add additional speed to their swing. And some examples are Robert Garrigus or Richard Young, a student of Scott Cowks. And what they do is they increase radial deviation while moving towards flexion during downswing. And important not to mix this pattern with typical amateur faulty patterns. So what amateurs do is they extend and add radial. So they actually open the club face and make it more difficult to close it during the downswing. So these option C players are able to both flex it and add more radial to add more speed. So it's tricky to do, and few players can do it, but it's possible. And what they do is release the club head speed in all 3 dimensions, and they have also shorter flat spots, so they can be less consistent, and it's tough for amateur players because they don't practice enough, and they have often timing issues. So we do not recommend this as for a typical player to copy. So if you want to learn more about this, then do watch 2 webinars that we've had with Scott Cowks. Webinar, here are the links, and we'll post it up afterwards online. And Scott also has a Scott Cowks certified special certification course that I would definitely recommend you to take a look at. Okay, so this was the first area that we've learned about, those 3 patterns, and every player that's interested in finding his pattern should check out Scott's materials. Okay, number 2, one thing we've understood is that wrist extension is a consistency killer. And that's actually what Hank was also mentioning, is that wrist extension is determinant of club face direction. And this is a nice visual just to illustrate it, how adding extension opens the club face, the ball will go more to the right, an open club face, and decreasing the extension or going into flexion closes the face, the ball will go more towards left. And what typical players do on the left is then during the downswing, they're increasing extension. So they're opening the club face. And this causes a lot of inconsistency in their swing because they have a lot of changes in their wrist angles, which change where the club face pointing. It's very hard to consistently square it at impact. While players on the right, like Tommy Fleetwood, they have very stable extension. So you can see that slow motion video, how that extension is barely changing. And it's actually just slightly decreasing during the downswing, and they're slightly bowing the wrist. So there's a very stable club face during the swing, which ensures that the player is actually controlling it and also controlling the shot direction. So they're very consistent. And using HackMotion data, we've seen also just measuring those good players versus bad players, and also bad players when they improve. So the red line is the swing before change, that there was too extended at the top, and the player was adding more extension. So you can see that it's just going up and up and up. And then at impact, the player is also very extended here. So he's scooping, and he's going to have a very open club face. He's going to lose a lot of speed, and he's going to have a lot of difficulties. And then after a bit of work on those wrist angles and the club face, the player is much better at controlling those wrist angles at the top. He's maintaining about the same extension he had at address, and then decreasing at impact, and getting much flatter wrist, and having much better control of the golf ball. So this is very important. And the good news is that with HackMotion, you can actually learn the pro pattern. We have data from different pros, and we have saved that data as kind of sample, both as a graph that you can check out in the pro version of the app with the different tour players. But in the player app, we also have it as encoded ranges that we recommend. And at the top, we recommend you to stay about the same as at address amount of extension or a bit less, and then decrease it by bowing the wrist at impact. And you can use those ranges and work on it based on the A pattern that we discussed in the first part. So the third thing is we also have the trail wrist data inside the app for pros. And that's a relatively newer thing that we've added, but it has also led to very interesting findings. And one thing that we found is that tour players, when they go from the top to impact in transition, they actually add some extension in their trail wrist. And you can see here, there's a bump that the red arrow shows. that the player is increasing the extension. And we can contrast this to a typical amateur. So what the amateur does is, even though he starts more extended than maybe the pro, he doesn't increase the extension in transition. Instead, he actually lets it out very early, and he ends up flexed at impact. Here, the red arrow pointing. So he's kind of scooping the ball with his trail hand, and that's not what the pros are doing. So what the pros are doing is they increase that extension in transition. So they do this motion more, and then at impact, they're actually more extended in their lead wrist, which helps them to control the club face also better, and they're not scooping it. So that's one interesting finding. And we also have some drills on our homepage that you can learn from. And these drills are developed or shown here by Christoph Bausek. And this is called the trail hand open drill. You can again learn more about it on our homepage, but basically you just put your trail hand open so you cannot use it to scoop. And that's how you do the practice swings. Christoph is an excellent coach from Austria. He's European Tour coach, and he's teaching a special webinar from last year that's called Trail Wrist and Trail Arm and Golf Swing Pro Player Technique. And here's a link. We'll post it up so you can check it also out on our homepage afterwards. Okay, so number fourth thing that we have learned, and you should also learn it, is that there are two types of wedge shots that you must master. And this was an excellent presentation a few years ago by two coaches, Mark Blackburn, PGA teacher and coach of the year that year, and Lane Savoy, the co-founder of Wedgecraft. So both coaches are excellent experts in wedge game, and they also have measured quite a lot of tour players. And what they found is what players have to master is the two-sided spin mountain. So that's a metaphor. You can imagine there's the visual. I'll zoom it in afterwards. On the left side, you see the green zone, which if the x-axis here is loft that is increasing here, so the loft of the club, let's say when you open or increase loft, then it's going more towards right. When you close, it's more left. And then spin rate, which is RPM. So the green zone is the high spin zone. It has a relatively lower launch angle because the loft is lower, and it has also a higher spin rate. So here you can see it zoomed in. And on the opposite side is the red area, which is the low spin zone. So if this is kind of this low launch, high spin shot, then this is actually high launch, low spin. So you can imagine this open club face, which has more slippage and produces less spin. And why it's important is that after measuring those tour players and learning from them, we have found out the types of shots and how they look on HackMotion. So here's the flexion extension data. And first one, if you want to learn the low launch, high spin rate for usually longer distance wedges, you aim for gradual movement towards flexion in transition and leading up to impact. You can see that the green graph line is moving downwards. So the player is increasing flexion and up to impact, right? So that will produce this low launch. As you know, that more flexion de-lofts the club and produces lower launch and higher spin with higher speed there. And the opposite of this would be the high launch angle, low spin rate, where the wrist is actually doing the opposite. Instead of going towards flexion, it is going towards extension. It's extending actively through impact. So before impact, a chat parallel between position P6 to P7. So that's right before impact. Extension is rapidly increasing. So you can imagine that you're kind of rapidly increasing the extension, which is increasing the loft on the club. So using the data, we again have this data also in our tour player library inside the app or the pro version, and you can use it to learn those two shots. If you want to learn more about this, then you should check out the presentation Dynamics of Wedge Play by Mark and Lane. It's also published on our website. And lastly, we have putting, which is also available both for the player version of the app and the pro version of the app. And what we've learned is that there are functional and non-functional putting stroke patterns. And it was an excellent presentation by David Orr, who's a tour putting coach. And he has also a putting academy called the Flat Stick Academy. And he's been coaching a lot of great players, for instance, Justin Rose as well for putting. And he highlighted two types of putting issues. And this is, he emphasized here the trail wrist that is dominant for a lot of players. So first one is what he calls the disaster stroke. So it is a carry and throw pattern. So the player has the intent of keeping the face square. So during the backswing, he's kind of thinking, okay, I'll keep the face square. So he's actually carrying the pattern and then he throws it. So the trail wrist is moving into flexion. So you see here the data shows how it's increasing flexion. So it's going downwards, negative. And that means that he's adding loft in the backswing. And then he's throwing it during the downswing, downstroke from top to impact. So this is very hard to control, both the loft and the amount of power that you apply to the ball. So that's the disaster stroke. And the opposite of this is the brush and hold pattern, which is the functional putting stroke pattern. And the intent here, instead of keeping the face square, is to keep the putter low. And you can see that the trail wrist is actually moving in extension. So instead of doing this, which is a flexion, it goes into extension. And the hand forearm motion is more of a brush and hold. So it's a very opposite. It's actually increasing. So that was the example of what the player is working on. And here you can see the change of the pattern. And David said he achieved this approximately 1 hour before. On the left, the trail hand throws, and there's also excessive body motion and swaying. And afterwards, on the right, you see the player has reduced trail hand throw, and there's a separation with slight brush feel. So that's a functional pattern. So using HackMotion, you can, and the correct understanding of what is functional and non-functional, you can achieve this change very quickly. So if you want to learn more, be sure to check out David Orr's materials, trail wrist and putting and measuring wrist motion putting. He has some data from Brad Faxon, who's an excellent putter, like top 10 maybe of all time. And you can check out the data and learn a lot from David. He has a lot of YouTube videos as well that you can learn from and use HackMotion not just for full swing, but also for putting. Okay, so I tried to be very, very quick. It's although 5 topics are very, let's say, extensive, and I'm sure that most of you hopefully are curious more to learn about them. First of all, the tour player release patterns, ABC, not easy to understand initially, and I showed just the graphs for a split second there, but check out Scott's material. Then wrist extension is consistency killer. So because it controls the club face, then if you master the extension, you'll really have better club face control and you'll be a much more consistent player. Then the third is that pros have increasing trail wrist extension in transition. So don't just focus on the lead wrist. There's also things you can do to improve your trail wrist motion and learn what the pros are doing. You can do that with the pro app as well. Then learn it to use it also for wedge game And there's two types of wedge shots you must master, the high spin and the low spin. And finally, there's functional and non-functional putting stroke patterns. So learn those and you'll be much more consistent in your putting as well. Okay, I managed to finish quickly. So I think there are some Q&A questions coming in. So I'll take a look. So the question is, do wrist option 3 players tend to have less radial in backswing? So I assume that the question is about wrist option C3, meaning wrist option C. And I would say that the players probably have about the same radial deviation in a backswing, but they are able to downcock more. So it's not that they necessarily are underhinging, but they are able to hinge it more during the downswing. So I hope that answers. So I think no, but you'd have to actually measure each player separately. We can actually take a look at some of the data here. I'll just share my screen, 1 second. Okay, so as you see, the player does seem to have less radial maybe initially, but what you have to look at is actually the change also from address. So he has quite a lot of ulnar at address. So this looks like close to 30 degrees. And if he has around 10 here or something like that at the top, that's around 40 degrees of change from ulnar to radial. So that's quite a lot. It's hard to see here because I don't have the precise numbers, but let's say even if it's 35, it's a normal amount of change in those wrist angles. And if the player increased it here to more than 20 again, then he has probably quite a bit more radial deviation at this point than an average player. And if you contrast it, let's say with DJ's pattern, he has very little change. This type of player here, he's again ulnar, but he never gets very radial here. So you have to look at each player individually, but I would say the difference is maybe that those players have more strength in their wrists and they're able to maybe also sometimes flexibility for the option C. Okay. So there's a question, is the same wrist action the same for blade and mallet putter? I would have to say that it's a better question to ask for an expert putting coach, and depending on your specific grip and the stroke. But usually there are differences depending on the putter. So those things are not the same for all putters and all grip types. So you should better consult it. There's a question, do you have any plans to add full swing hand speed as data metric in the future? Is the hardware able to measure this? The answer is the hardware can measure this. We have been testing it, but we have just been very, very focused on improving the existing metrics and use cases for flexion extension, radial ulnar, rotation. So we are trying not to add just the maximum amount of metrics. We are thinking, okay, there are metrics, but a lot of players maybe don't know how to apply these specific metrics to their swings. So we would probably create more value by helping an average player to be better at that, rather than giving just additional metrics that will be helpful for some players or some coaches, but will not be so beneficial for the typical player who struggles to use maybe flexion extension to learn better club face control. But this is definitely something on our radar, and we have been thinking about it, but it's all about prioritizing our work. So there's a question, my problem is keeping the wrist at the correct angle on impact. My takeaway is correct, and the top of the swing is in the range, but I can't seem to get in the range at impact. Any suggestions? Usually this type of problem at impact is related to body rotation. So what you have to do to get in those positions towards more flat or maybe slightly bowed is you have to be rotated more at impact. So typically a player will be not rotated enough at impact, and what they'll have to do, they'll stall their body rotation and the hands will just go, let's say they'll release and the lead wrist will go in extension, so they'll start scooping. As soon as you start to rotate better, then your hands get in front more, and you'll also be getting into better wrist position and with better loft. So those two things are very much tied, and you should work on body rotation in this case, very likely. And there are some drills that we have on our page as well. For instance, I think a good drill by Rob Haney is about stop right after impact. So you take a shorter backswing and then you just stall and you stop and you try to get into a good position with hands in front of you, and you work specifically on this drill. So that's one way you can use wrist angles as well, just to keep the hands in the correct position and then work with the body rotating. Check out it on our homepage or on our YouTube account by Rob Haney, a good video. Can you also measure, add the direction of the movement in transition? So I assume that it's meant as the movement in transition of hands, not the wrist angles, because the wrist angles you can see easily in the graph whether the extension is increasing or decreasing. Regarding the hand direction, we have done a bit of tests, but not enough of testing of this specific thing. So I cannot give a precise answer about the technical capability at the moment, but it's something we have been testing, and don't be surprised if it shows up after a while in the app as well. Are you planning to provide more templates of tour players for putting in your app? Yes, we have been considering it. One thing that we will include is different functional, non-functional patterns more. So far, we see that depending on the grip and this type of the putter, it will change quite a lot. So one thing that you should focus on is that you don't have too much wristy motion during your putting stroke. So we have been focusing, just showing that, okay, the top players have some motion, but it's not a lot in the putting stroke. So work on consistency and not rapid changes in your wrist motion. Then there's a question. What is the data between address and topswing position for Tommy Fleetwood in this case? So what we see is that top players who have pattern A, as Tommy Fleetwood has, I'll show this in some slides as well. So you can see that the green line here is crossing around 15. And then at the top, it's about the same. So or a bit less maybe. So address and top are quite similar. So that's why the blue line here also signifies that it's flat. It's maintaining stable flexion extension. So also the numbers between address and top should be about the same. And then what you can see is at impact, then there's a decrease. So happens the bowing of the wrist or flexing of the wrist, and then players actually bowed. So that's how the pattern A looks. A lot of players get a bit more flexed at the top. They don't get like nowhere near DJ amount of flexion, but you can see that it's some players just bow it a bit more at the top, and then they have to bow it less at impact. But that's about, they never increase really the extension lot, or if they do, then that's really the exceptional case. Okay, so a question. If a student is using the HackMotion at another location, can you, as a coach, access the data online? Technically, there are two ways. One is he can just send you screenshots of, let's say, here's my graph, or here are my numbers from the last session. That will be a very simple case. Technically, you can share the account just as a password. Like if you don't use the account password for anything else, you can just share it maybe with your coach, and he can log in from his device, let's say John Smith, and he'll be seeing it the same view as you see it, and then he can log out it and log into his maybe own account later on. But there's no inbuilt sharing of data between accounts. It's not too often that users ask us, so we haven't implemented it. Okay. Another question. Can you measure backswing length? It's something, again, based on the data that the sensor provides. Yes, we can do that, but we just haven't focused on that because it's a bit different area. We consider it for the future, but we feel it more rational to really make the user experience as good as possible with the flexion extension, radial rotation data, create more maybe drills, inbuilt features in the app, more tour player data, and then keep adding. Because let's say launch monitors often, yes, you can get 30 numbers, but if you don't know how to interpret them and what you can do with them, they can become useless for most players. Some will always enjoy more data, but for most players, they need supporting materials just so they can learn to use the data as well as possible. Another question. Is there any gains to a player with mid-speed to adopt bowed wrist like DJ? Based on what we have heard from coaches, for instance, Scott Caux or Alan Terrell, who's Dustin's coach, probably not. You need high swing speed to play with that. It's a high swing speed swing for sure. One, the loft, and the other, you have to be able to rotate aggressively. So let's say if Dustin has like a minus 1.5 driver attack angle, if you have a low swing speed, you're probably going to be losing a lot of distance, and it's not recommended for you. So the pattern A works for most players, so there's not really use of applying the DJ pattern. A lot of questions coming in. Okay, so I think we can wrap up the Q&A section. And thanks a lot. If you have any more questions, you can reach out to us directly. We are always happy to reply. And our goal here is to always educate our users as much as possible. That's why we're organizing webinars like this, publishing all the content, and it's really exciting that we've had so much knowledgeable coaches ready to share their knowledge, and then we can distribute it later to players and coaches who can then use it to help their students or improve their own swings. All right, what I'll do, we have next up coming Jason Birnbaum, who's another great coach. He's been coaching PGA Tour players and also college players, and he wasn't able to join directly for the presentation, but he'll be in the Q&A section. So what I'll do is I'll play a video which we pre-recorded before, and then you'll be able to, let's say, ask questions, just write them in the Q&A part, and then we'll ask Jason, who'll be joining the call later on. There was a bit of an issue during the pre-recording, a bit of video lagging just because of unstable connection. So don't worry, it will improve. Just maybe first few minutes will be a bit difficult. So I'll put it on here.
Oh, hello, everyone. My name is Martins from HackMotion. Welcome to our webinar series for 2023. I'm thrilled to announce our next conversation for the webinar, which is something that's has been something that I've been dealing with my golf swing with myself, and is something I've been thinking about a lot, which is the grip in the golf swing. And to talk about the grip in the golf swing, we have a special guest joining us today. He's director of instruction at Manhattan Woods Golf Academy. He's Golf Digest Best In-State New York Coach in 2021, 2022. He's featured on Golf Magazine Watch List for Best and Up-and-Coming Coaches. He's the coach of multiple PGA, LPGA, and European Tour players. It's Jason Birnbaum. Jason, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Martins. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Awesome to have you and get the conversation going. Before we start, I'll explain or set up a little bit kind of how the structure is going to be for the call conversation. It's going to be a conversation like where we just simply ask questions around the grip. We start off with a little bit of like a macro view, and then we focus in on specific things around the grip and how they work in conjunction with the wrists. What's important, this is a pre-recorded conversation, but we still encourage people to ask questions, because when we air it, Jason is going to be joining us for a live Q&A after the presentation. So still, please, in the Q&A box, just drop your questions, and we will make sure we get them covered after the presentation. But other than that, why don't we get started? And Jason, I will ask a kind of a very general first question that could kind of help us set up the conversation going forward. Could you generally kind of explain what is the grip in the golf swing? What's the role of it? And what are maybe some kind of general theoretical definitions that we need to know about the grip as we're kind of progressing through the conversation?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, listen, it's really our only connection to the golf club, right, is our grip and how we hold the club. So we've heard a lot of great past players and champions and great coaches talk about the importance of the grip over the years. And it's one of these things that really hasn't changed, right? As the game has evolved and we've had access to launch monitors and things like HackMotion, you know, some theories have certainly changed about how we look at the swing or ball flight. But the grip has stood the test of time, really. I mean, you pick up a golf instruction book from any point in the history of golf, and you're going to see some things that still hold true today, a lot of things that still hold true today, and that's just how we hold the club. So, you know, it's one of these things. I'm not sure there's a perfect grip. Everyone has their own grip. We see all kinds of grips on tour. PGA Tour, LPGA Tour, we see strong grips, we see excessively strong grips, we see neutral grips, we see weak grips. I mean, like anything else, at the end of the day, it's, can we deliver the club an impact consistently and get the ball to do what we're trying to get it to do? And do we have a grip that's helping us to do that or hurting us to do that is really the question that the coach is presented with. But yeah, I mean, the grip is, like I said, only connected to the club. So it's got to be something that works for you, or it's going to be compensation from the start.
My follow-up question to that would be, what type of grip you would recommend for a beginner player? Because obviously you mentioned the process of developing and having it personalized, and person that's kind of spent much more years in the game has a better understanding of his personal grip and the nuances around it. But how should a beginner think about it as he's developing his grip, as he's starting his golf journey?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say my personal preference is to be somewhat neutral. I wouldn't want to be too much on one side of the spectrum, but I certainly would advocate favoring a little bit of a stronger grip, a little bit on the strong side. I would err on that side. So I'm right-handed. So for a right-handed golfer, it would be having both hands turned to the right a little bit so that you can see two knuckles on your left hand and a little bit of the logo on your glove if you were wearing one. I find a little bit of a stronger grip helps to engage the wrists a little bit, which is something that beginners struggle with. Having a stronger club face will just help to maximize distance and get the hit a little bit more solid, which is important to get with a beginner. So my personal preference would be on the neutral side, not too drastic either way, but definitely favoring being a little bit stronger, being a little bit more in the fingers of the lead hand, just to encourage a little bit more wrist action, a little bit more release of the club. I would highly recommend that for a beginner.
Yeah. And one thing I would love to clarify with respect to that, given that it is personal, right? There isn't such a term as a good or a bad grip, I would assume, right? Where the people shouldn't, especially as they start, they shouldn't be thinking about, hey, I'm having a bad grip or I'm having a good grip. It all is very personalized, I would assume, right? In your coaching experience.
I would agree with that. I mean, grip is definitely one of these things that's a very individualistic part of the game. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. But with that said, you don't want to be too much of all the way to one side with the grip. So an excessively weak grip where the lead hand is turned towards the target too much and very much in the palm will be very detrimental to the swing, especially a newer golfer. And contrary to that, a grip that's extremely strong and very much in the fingers, and the lead hand is turned way to the right, that would also make things a little bit difficult. So as long as we're not like way outside of the parameter of what excessive would be, for me, it's okay. But you certainly don't want to see one that's way off base, because it's just going to lead to a lot of compensations in the swing, and it's going to make life difficult. It's sometimes the worse your grip is, the better you swing, the worse you hit it. So you don't want to put yourself, this game's hard enough, so you don't want to put yourself in a position where by improving your golf swing, you actually hit the ball worse, right? A lot of golfers that have a poor grip, they make a lot of swing compensations in order to make that grip work. So if they don't change their grip and they get their golf swing better and they're not making those compensations as much, a bad swing, a good swing is going to hit a bad shot with a bad grip. So that's where it becomes important. But to answer your question, you just don't want to be too much on one side.
Yeah, that's awesome. And how would you, and what would be the process of kind of landing on a specific grip as you start to swing? Would be simply kind of figuring out, landing a theoretical benchmark and then seeing how you swing a couple of times and what's the ball flight outcome of it? Like, what would be that process like for a person as he's, practicing to find that grip he's comfortable even in the beginning? And maybe there are some strategies that you've seen over the years that have been effective. One thing you mentioned, obviously, not to be on either of the extremes. Is there anything else in this kind of, especially in the beginning stages, that are some do's or don'ts for players that are, finding their grip?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, even though it's like we said, an individualistic part of the game, there's not one grip that fits all. There is, what I would refer to as a good grip, right? So a good grip is one that kind of runs diagonally from the middle of one's index finger through the base of their pinky, right? So in looking at it from this angle, it would kind of run this way diagonally through the fingers, so that you've got a good hold on it, and you've got it in the fingers. That will certainly improve your range of motion with wrist hinge going back, and a little bit with how the wrists work through the ball and releasing the club. So I think it's important. One thing I'll do with students quite often is I'll use a Sharpie. And so I'll draw a line on my glove, so with a Sharpie, so I can see the diagonal line and how I want the grip to fit in there. And yeah, it's a good way of practicing. It will just ensure that the club's in the same position every time, because at the end of the day, that's what's most important. You want to have a little bit of consistency in terms of doing the same thing over and over, and having the line on the glove and a reference point, so to speak, for where the club should be sitting diagonally across the fingers will help.
Yeah. Is there anything with regards to equipment that the person should take into account, measuring or analyzing his grip as he's swinging?
Sure. I would say the thickness of the grip is super important. As club fittings become more and more popular, I certainly see that as being a big part of the whole sort of fitting process, is measuring a golfer's hand size and seeing how big their hands are. If a golfer has large hands and their grips are too small for them, that will increase that will promote a stronger grip. They'll have it a little bit more in the fingers and the hand a little bit turned over. And likewise, contrary to that, if they have small hands and a big grip, a mid-size or an oversized thicker grip, the club's going to sit very much high in the palm, and they're going to have a weak grip, which will be detrimental. So I think, texture is obviously a preference thing in terms of what kind of grip they're playing, but grip size is very important, and something that I see on a daily basis on the lesson tee that golfers are struggling with. I'll see golfers with somewhat medium size to small hands showing up with big jumbo thick grips, and the club is just sitting very high in the palm, and the grip is weak, and they're struggling with a big fade or a slice. And I'll see, contrary to that, I'll see golfers with bigger hands that have grips that aren't big enough for them or don't have enough tape underneath, and it's promoting a strong grip and a much more handsy swing. So I would say the grip size, the diameter of the grip, super important in this whole process.
Yeah, and obviously with HackMotion, our key focus area around the swing is obviously around the wrists, which we feel like are very important in the swing. What's your perspective? How do the wrists? What's the wrist relationship to the grip, especially in the swing? Obviously, how are you thinking about this from a coaching perspective, and then how's that dynamic for you when working with students?
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, the grip has probably the biggest influence on wrist action, and wrist action is critical. So the grip is a huge, huge influence on this whole thing, and can really change some of the HackMotion numbers, for better or worse, big time, right? So the more the club's in the fingers, and the more the club is a little bit in the grip in a little bit of a stronger way, the easier it is to manipulate the face and the shaft, and to really sort of twist and turn on things. The higher the club is sitting in the palm, the more restrictive the wrists are, and the less wrist action and the less manipulation that's going on, which is why we putt that way, right? When you're putting, you don't want the wrist to be very involved. It's the opposite of the swing. So we sit the club much higher in the palm when we're putting, to take wrist action out of it. So that's why it's the opposite. But it's a huge part of it, and depending on what someone's looking for, right? Whether from a coaching standpoint, they're trying to add more flexion or more extension, or trying to adjust the radial and ulnar numbers, the grip has a massive influence on that, and it is a really big part of my coaching and how I go about changing those numbers on HackMotion.
Yeah, and when working with the student, let's say that he has essentially kind of a swing fault that's somewhere around the grip and the wrists. What's your process like? Is it the kind of the grip that gets adjusted? Is it you're trying to get something else on the wrist action? What's that process like? And where do you start with a student that has a particular issue where ultimately they're not able to hit a ball straight, and you think the issue is somewhere around the wrist and the grip? How do you go about the process of fixing that, and what's the kind of the process there?
It's a great question. I think first and foremost, from a coaching standpoint, it's important to, sort of diagnose what's causing the miss when it's offline, right? So is it more face related? Is it more path related? What's the start line? Where is it curving? How much is it curving? How offline is it? All those things factor in. And then for me personally, when it is more face related is really when I would start to dive in there and get into the wrist angles. When the start line is off, the club face is sort of, there's a lot of variance in the club face throughout the swing and an impact. That's when I would sort of attack the wrist angles a little bit more if it's more face related than path related. And it's interesting, obviously, when a golfer is struggling with a slice, one would always just think, okay, I'm gonna strengthen their grip, but that's not always, sometimes strengthening the grip creates a little bit more extension, a little bit more cup in the wrist that opens the face even a little bit more sometimes. So I'm not always quick to go stronger grip when I see a golfer slicing. Contrary to that, when I see a golfer hooking, a really excessively strong grip is obviously not going to help. So I'm much more inclined to weaken a hooker's grip than I am to strengthen a slicer's grip. That's not to say I wouldn't strengthen a slicer's grip. It's just that every case is different, and that's sort of something that I'd be looking at and analyzing. But yeah, it's interesting stuff. It's probably, for me, I can have the most success in the shortest amount of time as a teacher by adjusting grip and wrist angles if someone's club face is off.
Yeah. And what will be kind of maybe your general suggestions for someone who's going through that process, maybe also partially on his own? Maybe he has the access to the technologies and he's able to analyze all his data. Are there any kind of coaching suggestions you would have for a person that's trying to figure it out, whether it's a grip or it's a wrist problem, and maybe kind of what would be some practical suggestions how to go through that process? Is it just maybe taking 20 swings, look at the numbers, see where you're trending, or there's something else he could do?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's got to be some good self-diagnosis in there in terms of putting the blame in the right area. But let's say a golfer sort of, they're missing the ball to the right, and they go through this whole process, and they've determined that the club face is the culprit and the face is very open. Once that's been determined, then I would always look at the grip first, right? If the grip is in a good position where it's my preference where I talked about where it's on the neutral side but favoring slightly stronger, then if it's already in that position and the face is open, then obviously I wouldn't look to fix it. But I always look at that first because it's the quickest adjustment that you can make. So if the grip is off and someone sees they have an excessively, let's say, weak grip and they're struggling with slicing the ball to the right and having a hard time controlling the club face, and yeah, I would look to, I'd look at my grip size, I'd look at where the club is sitting in my hands, and there's great golf instruction books too that show great pictures of the grip, and like I said, it stood the test of time. So any golf instruction book that's showing you what a good grip looks like is good reference point. Drawing the line on the grip for where you want the club to be sitting is important. Mirror work is excellent. Most ranges have, there's a mirror somewhere in the vicinity. So looking at your golf swing in a mirror, looking at your grip in a mirror can be very, very helpful. At the end of the day, it's like anything else, though. I think you need to have a little bit of a plan, right? So you need to have a plan for the grip, right? What am I trying to achieve? Is my grip too strong and I'm trying to weaken it a little bit? Is my grip too weak and I'm trying to strengthen it a little bit? And then just be diligent with the practice. And you don't want to hit too many golf shots with the wrong grip, right? So staying on top of that and being a little bit more diligent with practice and going through the routine is very important. So routine is huge with grip. Everyone talks about pre-shot routine and the steps they take as they approach the ball to hit a shot, but just grip routine, right? So when I'm taking my grip, I like to hold the club down at the bottom of the grip with my right hand. I'm right-handed. Make sure the club face is square and the leading edge is straight, and then I'll kind of fit my left hand on there as I'm holding the club up off the ground. Fit my left hand on there in the fingers, and then I'll just slide my hand down. So I go through this procedure every time during my routine. I hold it in my right hand at the bottom of the shaft, make sure the face is square. I'll fit my club in the fingers there in my left hand, make sure it looks good to my eye as I'm holding it above the ground, and then just slide my hand down. A lot of golfers take their grip with the club on the ground as they're approaching the ball, but I like to take it up here in front of me. It just ensures that it's the same way every time. But I think grip routine is an overlooked area that especially, newer golfers would benefit from.
Yeah. And are there any kind of maybe physical limitations that people and golfers should consider? Maybe that they're not able to grip the club with a strong grip, that also are something where you shouldn't be kind of pushing against your kind of physical limitations where you just don't feel comfortable. Is there some
For sure.
other aspects like that a golfer should consider, where it's not, again, where you're not just aiming for a strong grip, right? You're just trying to find your grip. Is there something like
Sure.
that you've seen that people also should consider as they're going through this process?
Absolutely, that would play a role. It's one of the first questions that I'll ask a golfer when they're coming for a first lesson as I'm assessing them is, physical limitations or past surgeries, or, sometimes you'll get a golfer that's had wrist surgery and they don't have good flexibility in their wrist, or they've broken their wrist a few times in their life previously. So, as a coach, you've got to know those things, and you've got to take those into account, and you've just got to make adjustments. I mean, you certainly don't want to ask a golfer to do something that they can't do, or something that's going to cause injury or hurt. But that absolutely will play a role, and should go into, some golfers will show up and they have bad arthritis, right? So when you have bad arthritis, oftentimes a thicker grip, or a grip that's a little bit bigger than normal, helps with arthritis. So even though that might not be the best thing for that person's golf swing, a thicker grip, it might be what's necessary from a health standpoint, because they've got bad arthritis. So you've got to navigate through those things as a coach. And it's just important to know a golfer's previous history, and that is a big aspect of it for sure.
Yeah. And when you look at, for example, in particular with HackMotion, when you're using the product with golfers, as it measures also the grip value, are there any specific numbers or trends that you like to see when a golfer's going through his routine and making multiple swings at a time? Is there a specific thing he should be focused on? Is it maybe hitting consistent values for the grip? Is it trying to be consistent? Is it maybe kind of just being in the range that they should think about? How should they think about when using HackMotion in their daily training sessions? How should they kind of maybe look at the numbers, and how should they think about them? And then from that perspective.
Yeah, I think, you're not trying to be so rigid where it's like, okay, I've got to be on this number every time, or it's not going to work. There's just got to be some parameters to it. So personally, I'll look at the address position quite a bit on HackMotion in determining someone's grip and whether it's where I'd like it to be. And I like the numbers to be in a relatively low number. I'll look for anywhere from sort of 10 to 25, so to speak, or 10 to 25 to 20, something in that range. I've seen at least the best players that I'm working with at the tour level, at address, obviously you don't want it to be 0, because there does have to be a little bit of extension there of a cup in the wrist and a little bit. But I say like the mid to high teens or low 20s is probably what I see as being the most consistent number for the grip with the address position in terms of the extension, so that you don't have to make many compensations in the swing.
Mm-hmm. And you've already mentioned the specific case example about slicing or hooking already before. When a student is struggling with either a slice or a hook, and he feels like it's a grip issue, is it always the case that when he should strengthen the grip with a slice and weaken it with the hook, or it's just a little bit more elaborate than that? And something else also has to change, or like how would you go about that process for the golfer?
Yeah, I would say it's different for everyone, and like I made reference to before, I'd say when you are hooking the ball, you would usually almost always benefit from weakening your grip and placing the club a little bit higher in the palm, almost always, in at least the experiences that I've had. So that is something that I would definitely look to. Now, if someone's hooking the ball and they have what I would say is a good grip, neutral to slightly strong, then I obviously would not change that in any way. But if they're hooking the ball and they have a very strong grip, I would look to change that pretty much right away, especially a younger, flexible golfer. If someone's slicing the ball, I wouldn't always necessarily strengthen the grip. A lot of times golfers show up with a strong grip and they're still slicing the ball. So it doesn't always, sometimes having a strong grip, it adds a little bit more extension, and it makes it more difficult to not slice. So at the end of the day, for a slicer, I'm trying to improve their wrist angles. Mm-hmm. And I am looking as a coach to say, okay, can I improve their wrist angles by adjusting the grip? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is maybe not. So that would be what I would look at. I would say, okay, can this person benefit by changing the grip to achieve a better wrist angle? And if the answer is yes, I would certainly change it. But sometimes strengthening the grip for a slicer is very important, and sometimes, being neutral. Sometimes being neutral on it even helps to flex that wrist a little bit more, as opposed to being stronger. So I kind of take that on a case by case basis. But the contrary to that is a hooker will almost always benefit from a weaker grip in the experiences that I've had.
Yeah, it sounds like it's always not as simple of just kind of a tweaking just the grip. It's always a little bit of a kind of a more complex solution, right? Given the student, his skill level, experience, and all of those factors combined. So it's not as simple.
One thing I'd say, Martin's, again, is a good drill for golfers, and something to look at, is to actually make practice swings or practice your grip with a putting grip, because with a putting grip, the top is flat. Right, so you're able to really change the club and adjust and manipulate your wrist a little bit easier with that top part being flat. The other thing with a putter is it has very little loft on it. Right, a putter has 3-4 degrees of loft on it, so you're able to see the face a little bit more clearly. The average golfer at the top, as to whether it's a little open or a little bit closed. So I have a lot of my students practice, if they're struggling with the grip and club face, I'll have them practice a lot by making practice backswings with a putter. And a putter grip, it's a little bit easier to see what the face is doing and to control the wrist.
And that would be simply kind of just doing some practice swings in probably maybe a little bit of a slow motion, I would assume, right? Of just kind of looking what's that relationship like? How's the face with respect in conjunction with the grip, I would assume, right? Absolutely.
Slow motion, in a mirror, indoors. You're not actually going to be hitting a ball with a putter. So in this time of year, in the off season, for most golfers, especially in the Northeast, it's great practice. I've actually had students that put a putter grip on a 8-iron and practiced hitting shots with the putter grip when they're 8-iron. Just really helps with face control. And I have a flat cat putting grip, which is a more extended flat line at the top, and I think practicing with something like that is great to control wrist angles and club face.
Yeah, and when it comes to the swing and specifically chipping and short game in particular, is there anything in particular to that part of golf and grip that people should think about, or is it kind of very consistent as it is for the full swing?
Yeah, I would say it's fairly consistent. I don't see too many golfers that have one kind of grip with full swing and a totally different kind of grip with chipping and pitching around the greens. I would say you've got to be somewhat careful if you've got a strong grip, right? A strong grip is not as ideal when you're hitting shots around the green, because it gets the wrist a little bit too active almost if it's too strong and in the fingers. We've heard Tiger even talk a little bit about how he weakened his grip a little bit for certain chips and pitches and had the club sitting a little bit more upright and higher in his palm. So I'll do that with some players. Better players, I'll do it with a little bit more, make it maybe a slight grip adjustment for chipping and pitching, get the club sitting a little bit more upright and higher in the palm to take some hands out of it. So yeah, there are some times, I would say, for better players mainly, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing actually that has come up obviously within our community in questions is something around the grip pressure, right? Because that's always kind of, especially for beginners, and it was for myself, or that question like, well, what should be the pressure, how you grip the club? Are there any kind of suggestions how to think about that for a golfer, like how strong is too strong and how weak is too weak, and what to look at to potentially diagnose some sort of issue around that?
Sure, I'm a big believer in a firmer, tighter grip. I feel that when the club is too loose in the hands and people are just trying to be so loose with the grip pressure, the club moves around a lot and things change. So I'm a big believer in a good firm grip. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would have my grip at pretty high, like 8, 9, something like that. I've talked to a lot of tour pros and students about this at a high level, and almost all of them say the opposite of what the average golfer says. When the pressure's on and they've got to hit a great shot, they grip that club a little bit tighter, and it takes some of the manipulation and the nerves out of the hand. So I am a big believer in a firmer grip pressure, a tighter hold on the club, and I actually think that it helps to manipulate and make adjustments and change wrist angles a little bit easier when you've got a good strong hold on the club. And that's the opposite to what a lot of golfers are doing, right? There's a bunch of things out there that golfers have been trying to do for years and years that we've learned, the opposite holds true. And I would say grip pressure is very high on that list.
Yeah. And is it just the case that with a loose grip pressure, there's just so many things that can happen, where there's just kind of too many freedom, I guess, for the club to rotate? The wrists can do different things. Is it that the case? It's just like the risks go way up
For sure
if the pressure is too low?
Absolutely. Yeah. The club kind of swings you instead of you swinging the club, right? The head end of the club kind of does its own things, and it's just more difficult to control. And controlling the face definitely becomes more difficult with too loose of a grip. And that, to me, goes for all aspects of the game, from driver to putter. I think if you're driving the ball, which is one side of the spectrum, and putting the ball on the other side of the spectrum, I think a loose grip it can be very detrimental.
Yeah. And is there anything in particular a person should have in mind working with different set of clubs? Like, for example, should he have some difference when working with hitting a driver versus iron shots? Or should the approach always with perspective to the grip should be consistent, besides obviously putting, which is kind of a little bit of an outlier in that sense, but with other clubs, would be the consistency would be the main focus for the players?
Yeah, I would say it should be pretty similar through the bag. Like we said, there may be some short game shots around the green where you'd maybe want to weaken things a little bit, and obviously the putter, like you said, but through the bag from driver, to wedge, I would say the grip should be, pretty much the same. The routine should be the same in terms of getting your hands on the club in the right way, in the same way every time, and also how your hands are set on the club. Absolutely.
Yeah, and one thing when we look at also again wrist angles in conjunction with the grip, the kind of the popular words obviously is the flexion extension. Always that's the kind of the primary thing we focus on when it comes to wrist angles. But in your experience, how does radial and ulnar deviations kind of tie into that? Because that's also obviously a nuance around the wrist angles that's important. How does that kind of fit into the wrist angle grip discussion for you?
Sure, I think that's a big part of it, right? So in the backswing, hinging the club is super important. I think using your wrist, getting the angle set, getting a little bit of leverage and angle on the club, and just from a sequencing standpoint and a strike standpoint, really important, especially for newer golfers. And coming down, whether you're trying to hold the angle or we hear a lot of golfers trying to throw it a little bit more these days. Being able to do those things, right? Set the club a little bit more radial, throw the club a little bit more ulnar. You've got to have the club in the right spot in your lead hand. I mean, you've got to have it a little bit more in the fingers so that you can, you got good range of motion in your wrist, and you can work it the way that you want to. It's similar to hammering something, right? If you were hammering something, naturally, you wouldn't put a hammer high in your palm and bang down on it. You'd put it a little bit more in the fingers, and you'd use your wrist a little bit more. And I tell students it's pretty much the same with a golf swing. You've got to have an ability to use your wrist the way that you want, setting the club going back, releasing it properly coming down, and having it sitting slightly diagonal across the fingers is really important in order to adjust some of those important numbers, like you're making reference to radial and ulnar.
Yeah. Again, it kind of, I think the thing that kind of struck me throughout all of the conversation is it's really kind of also a process, right? Where you're not looking at the grip in isolation to everything else. It is very much tied to the wrists and what the rest of your body is doing throughout the swing. So I think I would assume that's also part of the process, right? Where you just need to be kind of understanding of different parts of your swing as you're training, as you're playing, and just kind of develop that knowledge base, or essentially what you are doing throughout the swing.
100%. It's like, and it doesn't matter what level you're at, right? I have students that have been playing the game for 1 year, and I have students that are playing the game at the tour level. And it's like, you got to have a plan of some, what are you trying to achieve in your swing, right? What is your coach trying to get you to achieve? Is it more club face control? Is it a little bit more wrist hinge to get the club a little bit more up in front of you? And then depending on what that thing is there an area with the grip that you can adjust or improve to help you achieve what your goal is? And oftentimes the answer is yes.
Mhm. Yeah, it seems like it. Well, Jason, I appreciate you joining our conversation. I think there's a lot of stuff to learn and to digest, especially as I'm going to be working on my swing in preparing for the season. But I appreciate you joining for a webinar. We will have the live Q&A after this call, after this presentation. But Jason, again, thank you for joining, and thanks for sharing your insights.
You got it, Martins. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And HackMotion's added a good a good dimension to my teaching, and along with things like TrackMan and launch monitors, being able to show a student how the number is changing and how we're working towards improving. If you can measure it, it's great feedback for the student. And HackMotion's given us an opportunity to measure something that's super important part of the swing, and has really helped my teaching. So thanks.
Okay, that was a excellent conversation between Martin and Jason. And now Jason is here, and he should be ready to answer some questions in the Q&A section. Jason, are you here?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you well. Yes, so you have a camera as well?
It says I can't start the video because the host disabled it.
Okay, I definitely have not disabled it. But anyways, let's not worry about that. We have a time.
There you go.
Yeah, here you are. So we have time maybe for just a few questions. One was a question that came from the audience and was asking, the player has quite small hands and switched from overlap grip to baseball grip and had good experience. So what's your take on the different grip types and the hand size?
That's a great question. I really like the baseball grip, or the 10-finger grip, to be honest with you. It does a really good job of engaging the wrists. I've thought about it quite often. And if I was teaching a golfer who had never played before, new students, I would strongly consider their first ever grip being a baseball grip. Having all 10 fingers on the club just gives you a little bit more hold on it. And I highly recommend that. I think the baseball grip is a great one.
Mm-hmm. And also, if you have smaller hands, it's easier?
For sure, yeah. Just obviously, the more you can get a hold of the club, the better. So if you have smaller hands and you're a little bit at a disadvantage with having a good strong hold on the club, having all 10 fingers is only going to help. So I think that's great. My second favorite to that would probably be the overlap. I'd probably, save interlocking as a last option unless it's super comfortable. But top of the list would be the 10-finger grip.
Okay, that's great. Here, I start myself with a 10-finger as well, as a natural grip for myself as a kid. So, okay, the next question is maybe quite fundamental. Why do players struggle so much with changing grips? Because time again and again, I've seen players that they know they have to change, they're trying, but they just keep getting back to the old grip, and it seems like it can take the months with no progress changing the grip. So what's the reason, and how do you approach the problem of changing that grip?
It is probably one of the single most difficult things to change, because it's just comfort, right? I mean, when you have your hands on the club in a certain way for a prolonged period of time, it becomes very comfortable. And as we've seen time and time again in this game, what you feel like you're doing and what you're really doing. I know Hank even made a reference to a Tiger quote like that earlier this morning. If feel and real are two different things in this game. So I can't tell you how many times I've changed a student's grip and they feel awful, and then I'll record it and I'll show it to them and it doesn't look like it feels at all. So I think the answer to the question is, the reason why it's so tough is because it's uncomfortable. And my answer to your second part about how I'd go about doing it is, I'd probably do it in the off season, indoors, in the off season, when ball flight and seeing the ball is not as important to a golfer, no tournaments, things like that. That's probably the best time to go about looking to make a grip change.
Mm-hmm. And have you ever changed somebody's grip based on or using HackMotion? Has HackMotion ever been helpful for changing somebody's grip for you?
Absolutely. Seeing the numbers, has helped big time. So, I've got several students that, for example, will have, too much extension in their wrist. The number's very high. And if I can get them starting out at address with a little bit less of that number, I find that throughout the swing, it doesn't get to as high of a number. So yeah, grip has helped me big time in manipulating, changing, improving some of those HackMotion numbers. Absolutely.
Okay. And then last question, are there any grips that you would recommend maybe to hit longer for the player?
To hit the ball further?
Yeah, hit the ball further.
Yeah, no, not necessarily. Like I made reference to in the chat that we had, being on one extreme or the other is difficult. I am definitely, I like neutral, but I would certainly gravitate more towards a little bit of a stronger grip. I think to create speed, you got to use your hands, obviously, and you've got to have the club sitting a little bit more in the fingers. If the club is sitting too high in the palm, you will absolutely have a difficult time engaging your wrists, and you need to engage your wrist to create speed in the swing. So I would definitely err on the side of having a little bit more of a strong grip. I think that will help to engage the wrists, and that is absolutely necessary to create speed.
Okay, then actually just a few more questions came in. First of all, can the grip, or should be the grip, adjusted to help keep wrist flexion through impact?
Say that again. Would you adjust it to keep flexion?
Yeah, would you ever adjust then the grip to keep the wrist in flexion through impact?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's no right way, I would say, is my best answer. Like, I have had students that have a very strong grip, and I have weakened the grip to help that impact number. And there's also students that have very weak grips whose grips I've strengthened to help that impact number. So I think you've got to be working towards something, right? You've either got to, it's like we heard this morning about the Colin Morikawa swing, how he adds a lot of who bowed his wrist into the ball and into impact. So it's like, most golfers are trying to work towards that. There's not too many golfers that have too much of that. It's probably a better player's issue. But I would just have an open mind with that part of it. Whether you're a coach or a player, you just got to have an open mind. You've got to be experimenting a little bit. That's one of the reasons why I think HackMotion has been so helpful for me, because the answer's in the numbers, right? You can really take the opinion out of it. I mean, you're either achieving something that you're trying to achieve by getting the numbers better, or you're not. So having the feedback of those numbers is, you're knowing if you're on the right track or not, and trying to achieve what you're after.
Okay. So one user here is he's playing interlock grip. Is kind of quite comfortable with it. Try to use the overlap grip. Feels he's hitting a bit better, but not confident enough. So feels like he wants to change, but not sure. Is it would you recommend in such situation to change, just if there's a feel that you're kind of improving a bit?
I like to tinker and experiment. That would be the direction I'd go. And this time of year, January, February, March, when it's, the off season for most golfers is the time to be doing it. But I would be trying it out. I'd be experimenting. How do the numbers change when you go from interlocking to overlap, or from 10 finger to interlock? Do the numbers change? I would try to keep the feels out of it. I say that to students in the beginning. Don't worry about what it feels like. It's probably not going to feel very good if it's different. So trust the numbers and go off of the numbers a little bit more this time of year than the feel. If it's the middle of the summer and you've got golf tournaments coming up, or you're playing, more important golf, feels more important. You're not going to play. You can't go out on the golf course feeling terrible and get things done. So I would, that would depend on the time of the season. But right now, this time of year, I'd be tinkering and experimenting with some different things, checking the numbers, and not worrying too much about what it feels like.
Okay. And then the final question is actually for off season. A player wants to improve his grip strength. What would you suggest? Sorry.
Any exercises. Squeezing a ball, I think, is really good. There's a bunch of different things. I've looked at some stuff with the TPI guys as well, and improving strength, some of the Mach 3 training aids, swinging some of those big, thick ropes, trying to create a little bit more speed. A lot of the things that are on the market to help people improve their swing speed would also help them to strengthen their hands. And I think looking into some of those things would help any level of golfer.
Okay, that's great advice. And thanks a lot, Jason, for being here. You've helped a lot of golfers better understand the grips, and this will be excellent content for our users. So thanks a lot, and hopefully we can see you again in the next webinar.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Okay, then we'll have one final speaker, which is Marcus, my colleague. So Jason can disconnect. Okay, so we have Marcus, and I'll put him on in a second. He will be talking about the app more specifically and the sensor. We've been adding a lot of features, so we are receiving a lot of questions, and it will be kind of more of a software walkthrough, so you can uncover different features and understand how to use the app in more productive ways, maybe some new features which you haven't even noticed that we've added. So Marcus, then the floor is yours. First a little presentation and then a bit of Q&A afterwards.
Hi, and thanks for joining. The next 20 minutes or so, I'll try to give you a very brief tour on why we develop HackMotion. What does it do? And how can it help you in your practice sessions to improve your swing? And the core philosophy behind HackMotion is that we believe if you can measure something and understand how that measurement impacts your results, then you can improve. And that's exactly what we did with the HackMotion. We enable you to measure your wrist motion throughout the entire swing and offer you actionable feedback on how to improve, creating this sort of feedback loop of swinging, getting feedback, adjusting, and swinging again. And we measure your wrist motion down to a single degree of movement that cannot be seen on a video with the naked eye. With the HackMotion, you can work in your ball flight direction, distance, and consistency. Now, the way that we measure your wrist movement is through this lightweight sensor you put on your wrist. It measures your flexion extension, or bowing and cupping, your radial ulnar deviation, or cocking uncocking, your rotation, as well as the tempo of your swing. We're able to do that because we have two different sensors mounted inside a device. One sensor is located in your palm and the other on your wrist, as well as any sort of putts. Now, I'll also briefly mention that we have two different HackMotion types, the HackMotion Pro, the HackMotion Player. I will explain the differences between them at the end of the demo, but right now, just remember we have two different types, which I'll be referencing throughout this talk. So let's look at a practical example of how can we use the HackMotion in our practice sessions. We go to the HackMotion app and select the practice option. You can see that we have 4 available practice modes to choose from, 2 for full swing and 2 for putting. So let's start with the club face control mode for full swing, as that is a more beginner-friendly option to choose from and is available for both the player and the pro versions of the HackMotion. Now, the goal of club face control is very simple. It aims to teach you on how to achieve square club face and shaft lean at impact. And what I mean by that is best demonstrated with an example. Now, all good players have their shaft leaning forwards and a square club face at impact. The way they do that is by flexing their wrists more than they were at their adverse position. Here we can see how the club face is closed up and the player is in a great ball striking position. Now, the opposite example of this would be a too extended position, where the player has a lot of extension and impact with their club face really open, with a backward shaft lean looking like they are about to scoop the ball. And ultimately, the whole purpose of club face control is to help you achieve the correct position at impact. If you're too extended, you're most likely making a slice. Too flexed, and that's a common recipe for a hook. So let's start a practice session and see how HackMotion helps you achieve this. But first, I have to select my playing side. Since I'm right-handed, I'm going to be wearing it on my left hand, which is my lead wrist. If I'd be left-handed, it would be my other wrist, but I don't really have to worry about this since the HackMotion gives me a very nice illustration on which wrist it should be worn. So with that in mind, I'm all set. I can click start and immediately you can see the feedback I was talking to you about before. It's instantaneous. If I flex my wrist, it goes into flexion. If I extend it, it goes into extension. I can wave at you and the avatar waves back. No matter what I do, the application captures my movement in real time, which is pretty awesome. Now, all of this is cool, but there's not much we can do here without taking a real swing. So let me get back to you and we can see how a real swing would look like. So I've just taken my swing and I happen to slice the ball quite badly. And the first thing you'll notice is that you get instant feedback on your address, top, and impact positions. And for the top and impact positions, we have these green ranges that the player should be aiming for. These ranges are the optimal wrist positions that the HackMotion suggests to the player. To discover those ranges, we analyzed tour player swing data, and together with the leading coaches in the industry, came up with a swing pattern that 90% of the players should use. And we guide you on how to control your wrists based on the swing pattern. So coming back to the results, let's analyze them one by one. So I started the swing with plus 31 degrees of extension at my address or setup position. Then, during the backswing, my top position was plus 54 degrees extended, which is plus 18 degrees too much than my optimal wrist position. Because of that, I had a lot more work to be done during the downswing to flex my wrists enough, and I didn't do it. At impact, I was plus 22 degrees too extended than I should have been, which also was most likely the result of my slice. Now, because of this, we finally know what we're doing wrong, and we can start to address these issues. Now, where do we start? Is it the top or impact position? Well, luckily, the HackMotion is already guiding us. It knows that we should start with the top position, because if we start with top position, it'll be a lot easier for us to get into the impact position. And it's telling us that through this red line that's being highlighted right now. So ultimately, what we have to do next is see what HackMotion has to offer if we click on the top position. So here we get to see an overview of what exactly went wrong and how can we fix this. We have an illustration illustrating what our wrists look like and what they should have looked like, as well as a short pro tip that will guide you in the right direction how to start to address this issue. We go further down, we have some drills recommended, as well as an overview of what our position looked like in this practice session. And here I've only taken 6 swings, and only one of those 6 swings were in range. All the rest were too extended. Now, if you pay attention to the bottom of the screen, we can see that we are presented with 2 coaching tools to choose from. We can choose between the audio feedback and the guided drill practice. If we select audio feedback, the app will play sound to us whenever we get in the correct wrist position, which is insanely useful when we're doing drills. If feel ain't real, most of us have a hard time telling whether or not we're doing the drill movements correctly. With the audio feedback, we don't need someone standing next to us telling us whether or not we're doing them correctly. The HackMotion will simply play a sound to tell you when you got in the right position. So let's select audio feedback and see what happens. Now, immediately, we focus in on our top position and we'll hear a sound signal when we get our wrists in the correct range. In this case, whenever I get my wrist position in the range, I start hearing a sound signal telling me that's where I should be. With this, we don't even have to look at the screen to practice. We can just put the phone away and focus on getting the feel for the right position and working it in our muscle memory. Now, the other option we have is the guided drill practice. The guided drill mode is an interactive step-by-step tutorial that combines the best drills together with the audio feedback and some coaching methodology to fast-track your learning process. So this drill is divided into 3 different stages. First, you feel the correct position. Then you do a dynamic backswing and stop at the top. And finally, you do a full swing challenge with a ball. Now, in the first stage, the feel it stage, we guide you to truly get a feel of your wrist position and where it should be at the top through a slow rehearsal practice. In the next stage, the hit it stage, you have to do a full speed backswing and stop at the top. Once you stop, you already have to be in the correct position at the top of your swing. Now, this is different from the first one, as you have to get in the right position immediately. With this, our aim is to help you learn the correct wrist motion step by step until you're ready to do it in an actual swing. And in the last stage, you actually have to hit a ball and get in the range at the top. To show an example how this works, let me start the drill and let's go through the first round of the slow rehearsal stage together. Now, the HackMotion will guide you throughout the whole process. So the first step is to set up my address position. So I go to my address position, and once the HackMotion sees that, your next step is to swing to the top. Once you're at the top, the HackMotion will show you where your ideal wrist positions are. Once I get there, I will have visual feedback that I'm doing it correctly and how many times I have to do it again. And the whole aim of the guided drill mode is to provide you a structured and guided method of practicing to embed the correct wrist positions into your muscle memory. And lastly, if we now go back to our default view, we have our three positions, the address, the top, and impact. But additionally, what we can do is try to understand how we got to these positions by looking at the graph of our wrist motion. So the graph is available under the shot replay option. And here, if we expand the graph first, we can see how our wrists behave throughout the whole swing. One way to use the graph would be to understand how we got to our positions and act accordingly. For example, we know that I was too extended at impact, but what exactly did I do wrong? Well, it turns out a lot of things. Not only was I not able to reduce my extension enough before impact, the extension I was able to reduce was all negated by the sharp increase right before my impact position, which indicates that I might need to start looking at drills on how to fix my extensive flipping. And that's basically it for club face control. You take a swing and get instant feedback on what went great and what went not so great. From that feedback, you're 2 taps away from an interactive practice mode that guides you in solving your most pressing swing issue. And now, of course, we can all agree that ultimately what matters is the impact position. But by being able to get in the right position during the backswing as well as the downswing, we can make sure we get there consistently. Overall, it's a very easy to understand, actionable practice mode with various tools and tips that guide you in the right direction. Now, if you're a more advanced user who likes to see all of the data available to them, in the Pro version, you also have access to the analysis mode. So let me quickly go to find analysis mode, which is under practice and full swing. Now let's open it up. But before we start, the first thing to notice here is that in the analysis mode, you're not only able to measure what your lead wrist is doing, but also you have the option to measure what your trail wrist is doing, which is a great way to get an even deeper insight on what your wrists are doing in the swing. But in this analysis mode demo, I'll be showing you the data of a lead wrist. Now, I've gone ahead and already made a swing to show you how the analysis mode works. The first thing you might notice is that in the 3D avatar, we also get the live ulnar radial deviation data. Not only that, but this mode offers you additional data such as ulnar radial deviation for your swing positions, which is great for measuring your lag or your wrist rotation, as well as the tempo of your swing. It's also a lot more customizable than club face control, allowing you to set up your views as you see fit. You can hide the metrics you're not interested in. For example, I can hide the rotation metrics and only see my flexion, ulnar, and timing data. You can expand the view. You can change it to a graph view. You can see all the lines, or you can see only one of the lines. It's fully customizable to suit your own needs. Now, one of the main differentiators that separates the player version versus the HackMotion Pro is that the Pro version also comes with a library of tour player swing samples. The tour player swing samples consist of a lot of major league players such as Dustin Johnson, David Toms, and so on. And it has samples of full swing, pitching, as well as putting. And the best part is that we can directly compare our swing data versus the Pro data. To do that, in the analysis mode, we have to first select the comparison mode. Once we open that up, we now have to select with which swing we want to compare our swing to. So I'll click Add Comparison, Long Game, and here we have an option to choose from. We have tour patterns, that are general patterns that most players should fall into, as well as specific swing samples from players. So let's say that I'll select Mark Wilson's driver example. Now, the first thing we see is the graph of the player's swing samples, as well as a short explanation of what the graph shows us. Once I'm comfortable with the sample, I'm going to click Compare. And now we see how our swing compares to the pros, which is an awesome way how to get a better understanding of where you need to improve. or if you're just a really big fan. So to summarize, the analysis mode is a real-time dashboard of your swing data that can be analyzed in however you see fit. It has access to tour player swing samples, you can measure your trail wrist data, and it's overall a great way to get a full picture of your wrist motion in your swing. Now, as I mentioned before, the HackMotion can also capture your putting strokes. So let me exit this real quick, select practice again, and for putting, we have two available training modes to choose from: putting stability and analysis. Now, the putting stability is a lot like club face control for full swing. It's a simple yet powerful practice mode with optimal ranges to aim for. And your main goal in it is to learn how to make a putt with as little wrist movement as possible. So let me show you what I mean by that. So I've just made a putt, and as you can see, there's a few things going on here. First, you might notice that the putting stability mode measures your flexion extension as well as your ulnar radial deviation. Secondly, we get optimal ranges that we should be aiming for. In this case, the goal is not to move my wrist by more than 2 degrees in either flexion extension or ulnar radial direction based on my address position. Essentially, what we want is our wrist movement as minimal as possible. The flatter our graph line is, the less movement is in my wrists, the more predictable the putt becomes. So the data on the left gives me a quick breakdown of what happened. So firstly, I moved my wrists by 3 degrees from my address position during my putt, which is not so great since the range is +2 to -2 degrees. For my ulnar radial movement, I was in range, so everything's right there. Now, if I want to know where I moved my wrists, I can pay my attention to the graph and see that during my downswing, right after the top position, my wrist went out of the range. And that's about as simple as it gets. You make a putt, and you make sure you do not move your wrists. You see where you're supposed to be, and you can also see where you're moving them. And just like it was for the full swing, putting also has the analysis mode. So if we go back, select practice, analysis, and start. Now I don't have a putt here, but it's essentially the same as the full swing analysis. You get all your data for flexion, ulnar, rotation, timing, and the ability to compare your putts against pro players' data. Now, HackMotion is not just about instant feedback. We also aim to provide you with the right insights and the tools to be able to analyze your data and keep track of your progress even after you left the driving range. So let's exit the putting analysis mode, select our data, and select my default profile. Now, after every session, I will receive an overview of my performance results. So let's look at the latest overview I got from the club face control mode session and see what sort of insights can we get there. So the first thing we notice is that we get a nice overview of our session. How many swings we had, when did it happen, and so on. Now, we also have the ability to add additional data to our sessions. If we click on that pencil icon on the right, we have the ability to add a session title, for example, what we worked on. We can select a club and also add additional comments to detail what exactly we did in the session in case we tried new things or something unexpected happened. So let's try and do this. So for the session title, I'm going to give it golf course, as I did this on the golf course. Club, let's select the 7-iron. And for the additional comments, I'm not going to add anything. Let's just save. And now I have this saved to the session. I can easily reference it later when I go through my library of previous sessions. Now, if we scroll down, we have this thing called streaks. Now, streaks happen when we get in the range more than once. So my all-time best streak for top position was that I was able to get in the top range 3 times in a row. And for impact, it's been 5. And this session wasn't as great. So this is a really great way how to measure your progress, keep track, and just overall engage yourself with the HackMotion. Now, if we scroll down, we can see that we have this little blue bubble here telling us that in 100% of our shots, my top position was extended. Now, this is the key takeaway that we want you to take away from this session. Now, in my example here, I just have to remember I have to keep working on a top position, looking at top drills, not even thinking about impact before I can get that checked in. I also have a nice overview here. Now for the top, 100% too extended, not much you can do here except practice more. In the impact, I was 20% in range and 80% too extended. Now this also gives you a nice summary of where you're at. As you progress in your HackMotion journey, you can see those numbers going down and that in range number going up. On the right, you have a visual diagram, same numbers on the left, except visually. So for the top, you can see that all of them were red because I was too extended. In impact, I have one green line, that was my in-range shot. The rest were sort of extended or very extended. Now, if you scroll further down, we see this graph. For my top position, I can see where I was for my each swing and where I should have been. Green area is where I should have been. The red area is how far off the range was I. I can see that for the first 3 swings, I was fairly consistent. For the 4th swing, I went overboard. For the 5th swing, I started to go back to my usual pattern. At impact, I can see my first swing was in range. My second swing, I was starting to get away. In my second swing, it was starting to get away from me. My 3rd swing, I was really extended. I'm not going to talk about the 4th swing. And then the 5th swing, you can see that I'm starting to rein it back in. Now, this is also a great way to measure your progress within a session. Furthermore, if we click on the shot list option, we have a nice overview of all our shots. So let's say that I didn't like the 4th shot. I'm going to click that, click inspect, and now I can see the same view we looked at before. I can look at my graph. I can replay my 3D model to see how my wrist looked like in real time. So let me just replay that. If that was too fast, I can also do it in half the speed or a quarter of the speed. Really try and understand the nuances of my wrist movement through this interface. And all of this data, your past sessions, your swings, they are synced to the cloud. So if you're using multiple devices, all of your data will be available from any of your devices, accessible from the data tab in your home screen. And that's about it for now. What you saw here just now might look a bit different in a few weeks' time, as we're constantly upgrading the application based on your feedback. But if after hearing all this information, you're still not sure which HackMotion option is the right one for you, the player or the pro, I would summarize it like so. Get the pro if you're a coach who wants to be able to provide the best insights to their students on what they're doing with their wrists. As with analysis mode, you get raw access to all the wrist data that you could ever hope for. Additionally, the HackMotion Pro also supports multiple profiles. So when you finish a session with your students, all of its data is categorized by your student profile. But if you're not a coach, but more a player who's either looking to fix some common swing faults, advance their game, or just gain a better understanding of what their wrists are doing in the swing, then get a HackMotion Player. HackMotion Player will offer you actionable feedback and a guided approach with recommendations, drills, tips, and so much more. And if after a while you decide you're ready to learn more, you can always upgrade to the Pro version later. Thank you for watching.
Right. Well, thank you for watching again, as I said, and I'll be happy to answer any sort of questions that might have arose during this demo. We already had a few, but I'll be sure to answer any more that come up during this time that we sort of tackled them. Now, the first question that we have is that in the club face control mode, where I showed you demo, you had we had the strong grip and the ranges for the top and impact were a bit more extended. How would that change if we had a weaker grip? Now, to answer the question, quite simply, the ranges would adjust. As we just listened to our speakers before, what sort of grip you have depends on your swing and so on, but whichever grip type you choose, it's the weak, strong, or neutral, the ranges for the club face control mode will adjust based on your grip. For a stronger grip, the impact ranges will be a bit more extended. For a weaker grip, they'll be a bit more flexed. However, the change you have to make from your address to impact position will be the same. For example, if you have a strong grip, your extension might be at plus 30 degrees, then your impact range will be around plus 15 to 0 degrees. With a weaker grip, if it's around 0 degrees, your impact range will be around minus 15 or minus 30 degrees. It's still the same decrease of extension, it's just different outcomes, so to say. So the next question we had was, can you explain a bit more about the guided drill mode? Yeah, so the guided drill mode is our attempt to sort of combine virtual teaching with the HackMotion. So obviously we have the audio feedback, which gives you a sound whenever you're in the range. And the guided drill mode sort of incorporates this together with some drills with coaches and our coaching methodology. So for example, the guided drill mode had those 3 stages: the practice, the rehearse, and the challenge mode. And that we sort of developed together with coaches. So you can not only do the video, watch the video, and then try and do the audio feedback. You sort of get this live step-by-step guidance along with the actual feedback whether or not you're doing correctly. Now, the other question is it possible to wear one on each wrist and use 2 devices to monitor during a session? Yes, it is. You can use one on the lead wrist and one on the trail wrist. However, for the trail wrist, you will need a Pro version, and you will need 2 different devices connected to each of the sensors. So you can't connect 2 sensors to one device. So you might need 2 different mobile phones or tablets to do that. So is it possible to change the golfer if you have been chosen the wrong golfer for a session later on? Not currently, no. You cannot change a golfer after a session. So if you've had a profile and it's saved under that profile, currently it's not possible to move them. But if you reach out to us, we can do that for you through support. Are these practice exercises and dynamic ranges available on YouTube or our website? Yes, we have some videos on our website. We have a lot of YouTube videos as well, featuring other coaches, and all of them should be linked on our website under the Learning Center options. Also, we have an app tutorial inside the application where you can go through it and get onboarded on the application as quickly as possible. Okay, and now one of the last questions we have is, can I summarize the difference between the pro and the player model? Well, as I said in the video before, the player version has the core features of the club face control mode. So it has the same sensor. It can measure your extension and flexion for the full swing. It also measures your extension, flexion, and ulnar radial for the putting mode. It has the club face control mode and the putting stability. But the Pro version has the full analysis modes for both full swing and putting modes. So with the Pro version, you get access to ulnar radial, rotation, as well as timing. You can compare your data with tour players' data, as well as you have the ability to create different profiles for each of the students if you're a pro and that's one of your use cases that you're looking for. Yeah, and I think that's about it for now. If you have any more questions, I will be here tomorrow as well. Tomorrow we'll also have 4 more additional speakers, which I encourage you to come and watch. I mean, it'll look amazing. We start at 10 a.m. Eastern time just as today. And yeah, thank you for tuning in, and then see you tomorrow. Bye.